Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode. Today's episode is a little bit different than our usual format. Today is September 11th, 2023, 22 years since the towers fell and life changed as we know it. Today's conversation is going to be a breakup of a bunch of different segments. I called some friends of mine that I truly respect and love, people that have been on the podcast before with me, people that I can lean on, send a text to, or get a random phone call from, and catch up right from where we left off. That's what this job's all about. Volunteer career, it's about the relationships, friendships, brotherhood, and sisterhood that we create amongst each other, and that then we can live out in reality. The falsehood of what's happening in the fire service with the overuse of brother, overuse of sister, it's nauseating. And we need to get back to a time where people cared for one another. They put themselves aside, and they put the mission and the family in the forefront, and our own problems to the back. When we step through the threshold of the firehouse, we need to be there consciously, spiritually, and physically. We can't check our problems and bring them in with us because it distracts us. It takes away from the overall equation of what needs to happen in the firehouse, the sanctum of the kitchen, the apparatus, on the streets, and eventually to the service that we provide for people that expects us to be professional and proficient every single day at our jobs. It's important. And I think we've lost track of that. And so for me, I've always struggled with September 11th. It's not a day that I just get weird and get random on how my position or where I stand. But it's just a day of somber remembrance of those that sacrificed so much. And that day stands out to me because we're so close. I've mentioned it before that where I live, where I work, is in the shadows of New York City. We are across the Hudson River, about 25 minutes from the George Washington Bridge. We're up in elevation, so when I come out of my house, literally a mile and a half down the road, I can see the New York City skyline, and it stands out. And on cloudy days, it's hard to see. On bright blue days, on gorgeous days, it stands out, and you notice it every single time. I've never taken that skyline for granted. September 11th, 2001, the day that the towers fell and the day that our country was changed forever, was a gorgeous day, and it's talked about a lot. People talk about what a beautiful day. No humidity, gorgeous bright blue skies, and it was just a comfortable day. And we went about life in such an innocent way from where we are today. We didn't understand terrorism on our own turf for the most part. The World Trade Center was hit in 93 with a bombing that was performed in the underbelly of the World Trade Center. We've had domestic terrorism in Oklahoma City and a few other locations throughout our years, but nothing on this scale, size, and magnitude of being attacked by foreign terrorists from our skies with such a large loss of life. And that day changed us forever. It changed me forever. It changed our country. It changed our relationships, how we view the world. And this episode is not to bring this dark and difficult conversation to light. What it is storytelling. With our podcast, it's important for me to tell stories. We interview, the concept of National Fire Radio was to capture the conversations of the senior men, people that have been doing this job for quite a while, who have stories and experience that they need to share. And with that, we can do that in perpetuity. Perpetuity means the stories are here forever. We can document their stories where people can go, listen, and learn. And that's what National Fire Radio really was built on, the pillars of what we are and why we started the podcast almost 6 years ago now. But with that, it's evolved, and we've done a lot of other things. We interview not just senior men now, but we interview people across the board from different organizations, departments, different parts of the country, young and old, and everything in between, because it's when we talk about the job, we make the job better, and I firmly believe that. I end every episode with that line, and so for me, I mean that. It's not just a catchphrase. It's literally what I believe, that we need to keep the job in the conversation. We need to keep the conversation flowing so it stays current. And I think that parallels exactly with what this episode is all about today. Today, I have 10 friends, like I mentioned before, that have been on the podcast that are important to me, and I didn't know their stories. They're from all over the country. They're chiefs to probies to people in between. They have their story. Everybody has their story. September 11th of 2001 was one of those memorable days that people don't forget where they were in life, how they heard the news, where they were, what they needed to do, how they acted, how they responded, and then obviously the memories of the days, weeks, and months and years after. So today's episode is just that. It's some storytelling. It's me dialing up some friends and talking about September 11th and where they were that day. Each segment's about 10 to 20, 25 minutes. So I ask that you sit back and just listen if it's of interest to you, because storytelling is important. You'll hear a lot of emotion come through on these conversations. This was not easy for me to do, to be honest. A lot of times I'm the one in the forefront talking, steering the interview, and this time I'm sitting back a lot and letting people talk. I've gotten text messages since I've recorded these segments from some of these guests that said that they've never really put much thought to it or had to speak about it the way they did with me. And it made them rethink about their answers or how they carried on the conversation with me. And that just tells me that this is still very fresh for so many people. 22 years later, the wound is still wide open. This is a day that will go down in the history of the American Fire Service as the darkest day. We've lost so many that day. The Valiant, FDNY, the NYPD, the Port Authority Police. The list goes on and on of those that sacrificed that day, that did their jobs. They woke up that morning going to the job they loved, providing protection for the people they care for in a city that never sleeps. And they, at the end of the day, did not come home because they did their job and they would do it again. Not an easy conversation, a very difficult day, obviously difficult for the families and those that are involved, our brothers and sisters that were a part of it, all of it. It's a challenging and tough conversation, but there's a few things I want to talk about real quick before I turn it over to my guests. That day brought us together as a nation, as one people, as a sense of community came over us. Crime stopped. Racism stopped. It all stopped. Color didn't matter. Religion didn't matter. Ethnicity didn't matter. The guy that you were angry at the firehouse, you're angry with him, it stopped. The fighting with your spouse stopped. The argument with your children stopped. And in many cases, things got better. It brought us together. We need to focus on that. We need to focus on the good. And the good is this. When tragedy strikes, it's what comes from it and what we do with that is where we can judge how this all went down. We need to do better. We need to take better care of one another. We need to be one. We need to love this nation. We need to educate our youth about September 11th. We need them to know and to carry on the conversations because, like I said before, when the conversations continue, that is how we keep the memory and legacy of those that sacrificed so much that day alive. The spirit of the spirit of America, powerful when it's allowed to be on full display like it was after September 11th. A community, a nation that came together as one to fight a common evil that threatens our democracy and our very own liberty here on our own grounds. So without grandstanding or keep going and building up this conversation, give this episode some thought and consideration and think about where you were that day. You know, if you were a young kid in elementary school, you still have a story. You might have a memory about it. If you were there that day, you were witness to it, and you listened to this podcast, thank you for everything you've done. Thank you to everybody that gives time to this podcast to keep the conversations alive and to keep the conversation moving forward. I think that's the most important thing. And so when we talk about this job, we take it back to the firehouse and talk about it because it makes this job better. I challenge you all, after listening to this episode on September 11th, 2023, take a minute, think about the time and place you were at in life at that moment, and then share your story. Or go out and at least educate somebody sitting next to you about September 11th, or go educate yourself. If you're not aware, if you don't know the numbers, 2,977 murdered that day. 343 FDNY firefighters, including one brother from the fire patrol. The NYPD, 23 officers lost that day. The Port Authority Police Department, 37 officers lost that day. These are people that went to work to do their job, and they did their job. They did it well. They saved thousands of people, and they perished in their efforts. Talk about them. Go out, learn their names, learn their stories. Those 9/11 stair climbs are powerful. And this just dawned on me as I'm talking. This isn't in my notes, but this just dawned on me. They hand out cards of the fallen. They hand out picture cards with the faces, names, and descriptions of those people on them. So that when you do those 9/11 stair climbs, you're walking in honor of one of our fallen. What an incredible way. What an incredible way to keep the conversation going and talking about the legacy of that individual that you're walking for. We need more of that. We need you to go out and talk. So, like I said, listen to this episode. Think about where you were that day. Educate yourself on the information and truths that came from that day. Shy away from the politicism of all this, the commerce of all this, the things that cheapen what occurred that day. Get away from that and go talk about the job. Talk about those that sacrificed so much, the innocent people that were killed that day. Talk about the day. Talk about the days leading after it, the weeks, months, and years after it. And keep the memory of those alive that sacrificed so much on that fateful day in Lower Manhattan. So thanks for tuning in. And without further ado, please listen to some of my friends and their stories about where they were on September 11th. So my next guest that's joining me is somebody that I hold in very high regard in my world. I've gotten to know Dave Gallagher over the last several years. He is somebody that I call very randomly every couple months. I'll just pick up the phone and call. I've talked about that on the podcast before, where I like to once a week, at least once a week, if not more, I try to pick up the phone and just call a random person in my phone that I haven't talked to in quite a long time, just to say hello. It's better than a text. It's a 5-minute conversation, or it could turn into a 2-hour rant while I'm driving. But I enjoy those conversations, and Dave Gallagher is one of those guys. Dave is the OG, Old Man Gallagher, OG we call him. Very heavily rooted in the fire service. Retired out of Huber Heights, Illinois or Ohio. He's going to kill me for that one. But he is a dear friend and somebody that is a mentor to many in the fire service. And I certainly regard him as a very important person to me. He's been on the podcast before, and frankly, he's just an absolute gentleman all the way around. So let me dial up Dave and get him on. I want to capture his story.
Hey, brother.
Mr. Gallagher, how are you, sir?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. You know, I had an incredible conversation with a mutual friend who was doing something, and it made me think. And I thought, you know, for September 11th, I was conflicted. I didn't know what I wanted to do on the podcast that day. I usually on social media that day, I post images of brothers that I respect, people that I know were lost that day that were important to me. And I think that day is truly about, you know, of course it's never forgetting, and we could talk about that, but it's also the memory and legacy of those that came before us. And I know, I thought the way I could maybe do that is to learn some stories of other people. As you know, with the podcast, I love to tell stories. I love to hear stories, and share stories on our network with people that are trusting and believing in what we do. And so you certainly were, and it's so random that when I called you the other day, randomly, I didn't even know I was doing this yet. Or I would have said something to you. It was just a random phone call to say hello and to say hi, because I like doing that. And you're one of those guys that I certainly enjoy talking with. But I appreciate you taking a few minutes of your day. I know you're very busy. And, you know, so I was just curious. Your day, September 11th, 2001, 22 years ago. I know how rooted you are in the fire service. You have a very wide reach and grasp. You call many dear friends, and I know you lost many friends that day. I'm just curious what your day back on September 11th of 2001, what that looked like for you.
Well, the interesting part is I had just taken my mom in for some surgery, some light surgery at Kettering Memorial Hospital south of Dayton, because I was still there at the time. And I went in with her to sit with her before her surgery at 8:45. And I came out to a waiting room, TV and everything, and people were just standing there. And I'm like, something's not right.
Yeah.
And I looked, and the whole world had changed. You know, the smoke's pouring out of the tower. We saw the second plane hit. We saw the flashing to the Pentagon. We saw the reports coming out of Shanksville and all that. And the whole world had changed. We were just standing there gawking, and couldn't believe what we were seeing.
Yeah.
And especially when the second plane hit, and then it was like, oh wow. So I couldn't do anything. I was going to be taking my mom home, so I had to wait a little bit. The phone, our quote unquote network started ringing, call this, do that. The interesting part was when the first tower went down, the first thing that shot through my head, I was standing there and I said, well, I wonder who I know just got killed.
Yeah.
Because as I've told you before, we were ensconced, mid-90s is when my world opened up to the members of the FDNY and the friendships, that last to this day. And all I could think about was and a lot of the people back in the day for both conferences, fire engineering and firehouse, FDIC and firehouse, a lot of the FDNY people were SOC.
Yes.
There were certainly, truckies and engine people and all that, but you're going, whoa. And it was just, I don't know, it was almost surreal, but I knew, obviously, we all knew there was going to be a loss. It was just a matter of who it was going to be. So we, the phone didn't quit ringing. And I had been on Ohio Task Force 1. I was a rescue squad officer. And I was supposed to be on the rotation for deployment. But I had gotten hurt pretty good at a fire a week before and got pulled off the rotation. So, I didn't go.
Yeah.
One of my best and dearest friends, who was a team manager, and the other guys I knew when we put the program together, they went. But yeah, so that's kind of the way the day started there.
Wait, so how? Obviously, your mother. I mean, you're in a very unique set of circumstances there, and so you're in a waiting room with complete strangers. What was burning inside you? Like, I know for so many guys just wanted to go to the firehouse. They wanted to be with their brothers and sisters. They needed to find a place where they could quietly watch and yet be in the company of I don't know, similar feelings. Like, I'm just curious. I mean, you hear so many stories of September 11th with strangers come together and nothing more than that tragedy existed that day. Like, nothing else happened. And,
Right.
People saw through color, they saw through religion, they saw through, all of it. Like, it was just, we were Americans and we were struggling with not having answers and something that we've never seen like that before. Incredibly powerful, Chief.
Oh, absolutely. I think, we wanted answers. I remember standing there with all these people in this waiting room watching.
Yeah.
And the screen was splitting and this, that, and the other. And somebody went, whoa, what's that? And it blurted out of my mouth. I said, that's the Pentagon. And they went, what? I said, take a look. That's the Pentagon. And rank and file civilians, they weren't sure what they were looking at.
Right.
But then that, at that time, they all started going down their particular paths of emotion and doubt. And all I could think of was who, what, when, where, and how. I had a daughter. She was in the Air Force. She was in the intelligence family
Right.
of the Air Force. So it was like, all right, how's she going to play into this? What's going to happen here? What's next? And you're right. I would have loved nothing better than to just get to the station,
Sure.
just to be and see. Because I think the other thing we all suspected at the time was locally what's going to happen next.
Mm-hmm.
Is this isolated to 3 places? Is something else going to happen? We were right next to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. We mutual aided with them, a lot. So we're like, okay, where's this going? What's going on? And it was the big question mark, the big, the book with blank pages thing. We had the first paragraph, but after that, who's writing what? So, yeah, that was a lot of it. And like I said, just trying to figure out who.
Yeah. Well, and that for you, I mean, your Rolodex is quite vast, Dave.
Well, there were, like I said, the conferences, being involved in the conferences, right, and working side by side, learning these people, getting to be friends, having a beer with them, making friends. The one of the fellows that perished, Champ had introduced me to him, and Dana Hannon.
Yeah,
and Dana, Aaron Heller had asked. I had a little training company back then with Bob Swick and some of the guys, and Aaron Heller had asked me to pack up and come to Jersey, to New Egypt, to help them do a truck company operations class. So I said, that's awesome. I'm bringing Swick, and I'm going to get, Mike Champo, Greg Einsfeld from Rescue 3, and Dana Hannon, because I taught with these guys.
Yeah.
Greg and I taught together
right.
at FDIC exclusively, FDIC Indy and FDIC West in our little teaching group, along with Greg Falkenthal and some other guys. And Greg Einsfeld and I had become good friends. Our demographics were kind of the same, family, et cetera. I'm wondering, geez, is he there, type of thing. And I had worked around, and you sit down and you have pizza and you have some beers. Andy Fredericks, became friends with him, and Billy McGinn. I had met Chief Downey at all these things. So, and that was Chris Blackwell from Rescue 3 as well. So I'd had a chance to hang around these people. It was ironic that we were, I think, FDIC West in Sacramento earlier that year. And I was scooting down the hall and I saw Andy and John Cirillo, and Andy tossed me a hat. He goes, hey, you want one of these? I'm like, oh, thanks. Squad 18.
Yeah.
And they're by Harry Davis and Jerry Tracy and all these people that we got to know.
Yeah.
This extended family. So that, and then when Aaron asked me to bring the truck company, it was Dana and Champ and Greg. And that was the last time I saw Dana was August 18th.
Wow.
So just a couple weeks before. And he had just had proposed to his fiance. They were down in Australia, went up on the big bridge up there in the
Allison.
fire department. Yeah, Allison.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I see her. I see her often. She's a friend. I don't. Terry and I don't see her enough, but when we do, it's always, we catch right up. She's a beautiful soul.
You give her a hug for me.
I will.
We catch up on social media.
Yeah.
But the other part was that right after 9/11, probably 2 weeks. So I paid all these guys. I had my checking account for my training company. Dana's check was cashed He may have gone like Saturday or something,
Right.
and it was cashed on the morning of 9/11. Went into his account or whatever.
Wow.
And I still have that. He endorsed it and everything. And that is with a sketch that Sue did for me at Dana. Gave it to me that Christmas. But yeah, it was far reaching. I look at a lot of the people on the job today. Some of them, just wouldn't remember, and others weren't even around yet.
Well, that's it.
So
I mean,
so
the job
huge.
is getting younger and younger.
Right.
And we have a lot of people that were children when September 11th of 2001. I mean, it's 22 years ago, Dave. 22 years.
Yeah, my friend Mike Mull. I mean, he was my senior man. He was a task force leader for the task force. He was on the job with me. He was my senior man, and his son was born like the week, 3 days before, 4 days, something like that. John Michael was born, and he's like, could just watch my family. So we obviously, did that when they shoved off. So
yeah, let me ask you. I know how connected you were just through being at involved with all the conferences at the time. The fire service back then, it should be said, was very different than it is today in regards to conferences and opportunities. You really only had FDIC. You had FDIC West, which was a scaled down version of FDIC, typically in
Right.
California on the West Coast. And then you had Firehouse Expo, which was in Baltimore, and I think it bounced around in one or two other places. But
and went to San Diego.
But you didn't have a lot of regional conferences that you have today. And so the opportunity to network was really at these big shows. And so your network, it brought a lot of people into the big shows, and that's where your network certainly grew, Dave, right? So I want to ask you the weeks and months following. I mean, it was recovery was the mission up front, and soon that waned to, man, there's no survivors. We have nothing here. And then it went to, can we find anything?
Right.
Something to memorialize these people. There's so many families, FDNY, NYPD, New York City EMS, and then obviously the public also, thousands of people.
Yes.
And a lot of people didn't have anything to take away from that to bury. And so we were burying empty coffins.
Yeah, you're not wrong. So Swick and I, and families at the time, we made a road trip. We went up when the first person that I had heard about, and I want to say, I think it was Champ, who just did a Herculean job keeping us informed.
Yeah.
He was like the network. He was the pipeline. He just, he did amazing work as far as letting us know. The first person that I personally knew, Andy Fredericks, when he was discovered, and then there was going to be a funeral, and we were learning how strapped they were trying to get these done.
Yeah.
And Swick and I and our families, we road tripped to Suffolk, or Suffern.
Yep.
There.
Suffern, New York, Rockland County. Yeah.
Yep. And I want to say, arguably, and somebody could say, no, that's not true. But to the best of my knowledge, at the time, we got there in the afternoon, like right after lunch. And Mark Wesseldine, who had worked with Andy for years doing engine work and all that, he's coming out of the viewing room and coming out into the foyer, and he looked up, and what do you say?
Right.
And he's like, who's here? And I said, well, Swick and me are here. And he goes, could you guys do a casket watch? I think we were the first non-FDNY, first people outside of that, and even Rockland, like out-of-staters, I guess, so to speak, to do a casket watch. Right. I got my Class A's on, everything else, and I'm like, oh, crap.
No gloves?
I forgot my gloves.
Always. Always.
Always.
Always.
Always.
Yep.
I never have since. I actually carry 2 extra pair if I can. I don't know for the same thing. But I get this tap on the shoulder. I turn around, and it's the chaplain from the West Point Fire Department. He hands me a pair of gloves. I have them to this day. And he goes, "Here, we're getting deployed anyway. I'm not going to need these."
Wow.
And yeah.
Wow.
And I remember smacking a fool's pin into the lid, the burning globe, and yeah, and saw a lot of friends there and all that. But it was something. We tried to make some of the memorial services. I went to a memorial service, and is it Whitesville, New York?
Could be.
Where
Not
Chief Salk is from.
Oh, I think so. I do believe. Yeah, I'm not overly familiar, but I think that's correct.
Yeah, the memorials there and all that, and there were guys from Squad 41. Of course, Stevie Gillespie's a great friend.
Sure.
Close friend.
Mm-hmm.
So we were trying to do as much as we could to show solidarity and presence,
of course,
at different things, and then with Dana's family and all that. So we stayed for a little while, stayed for a couple of days, trying to do what we could where we could, and then had to get back to work. But boy, I'll tell you, every time you were on the edge, every time the phone rang.
Yeah.
Who is it? And it was Champ who called me the following St. Patrick's Day. We were at the Dublin pub in Dayton doing our usual, and it was somber. I mean, it was still there, obviously. I see it's him calling. I go over, and he said, "Timmy Collette found Dana." Okay. And found barcodes and things like that.
Right.
So from his gear. But yeah, it permeated for a long time. I was just talking the other day with somebody. We went up to, it was 02 for the 1 year, and it rained like crazy, and you saw the French guys in their shiny helmets and all that.
Yeah.
For the big memorial service and the parade at the Garden. And it was it was just it was amazing to see the turnout at that later,
all these years later, Dave, it still hits hard. I want to ask you, every year as this day comes around, is there something that you do that's just important to you, whether it's just a quiet moment of reflection, or do you watch any of the reading of the names? Is there anything that you do, or call someone that you know?
Yes,
please.
I have a list, and I call them the day before.
You do,
because I know that they're going to be busy.
Sure.
The next day, I call them. I do my best to call them on the 10th. Leave a message if I have to, just to touch base. But I have a list, and I usually get a TV on someplace to listen to the reading of the names. And some people are going to call me a whacker, and that's fine. The days up to it, even right now, 3-4 days up and a couple of days after, I do my best to, if I'm going out, to put a memorial shirt on.
Yeah.
From, whether it's from Dana or Squad 41 or Rescue 3 or whomever, and it was from people that I had an association with, but some sort of memorial shirt. Today, John Lewis from Passaic had gotten me this really cool green one, but it's a memorial tribute. And the reason I wear those, and I'm not trying to strike up any conversations, I just want people to look and go, "Oh wow, September 11th's coming."
Yeah.
Just, hey, it happened. It's real. The ramifications are still around today. Just so they maybe go back and think about, take a second. Last night I had a shirt on, and we were at our little street vendor show in the next town over, where Sue sells her artwork. And a guy stopped by, and he says, "You on the job?" And I said, "No." I said, "I'm retired out of Ohio." I said, "Good friends, etc." He's a retired cop out of Teaneck.
Wow.
You know,
Okay.
so we talked about today.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
but
Powerful,
now
Dave.
that's what we do. And
You said something that resonates with me before, that the average person didn't. I forget what your exact words were, but I made a note of it, and just the average citizen has a hard time processing it. Like we do, of course, but for somebody that doesn't even understand what they're watching, right? Oh, that's right. You were talking about being in the hospital and with the people, and you said the civilians there didn't know what they were watching. And go ahead.
Right. And they were so detached from it.
Yeah, right.
That's happening in New York. And I said, I could probably give you 20 names right now of people that are there if they're on duty today.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and it's just different, but that's what we do. We know that. And you know, whether it's that, or, you know, the Worcester fire, or the Charleston fire, or the Back Bay fire in Boston, or, you know, whatever. When we hear or see these, and especially now with today's social media and the immediacy, it, you know,
yeah.
I mean, some of the chat groups you and I are on, how fast does that travel?
Oh, of course. Absolutely. And I was going to say, and the reason why I was saying that too, just to back up what you're saying, is that 22 years later, most people have forgotten. You know, it's a chapter in the history book. But for us, for the people that listen to this podcast, right? For you and I and the others that I've asked to join me here, it's a scar that is a wound that constantly is reopened. And I say that in a way that I don't fault the public. We're just connected very differently to the tragedy of that day. And I think we need to do a better job. And if wearing a t-shirt for the week before and the week after, you're doing a small part in educating the public, Dave, then bravo, man. You keep wearing those shirts and you keep telling everybody a story, or remind them about the sacrifice that occurred that day and the legacy that has come from that for our fallen, and even for our American citizens that fell that day, and what that did to our country. It is an important chapter that needs to be discussed, and we can't just make it a chapter in the history book.
Right. And we were talking to somebody the other night, and he had been involved in the financial world.
Yeah.
And 27 people that he had worked with perished in the one tower.
Yeah.
You know, so it permeates. I think for, you know, like you said, civilian, PAPD, NYPD, the EMS, fire, the people that were there and were lost and continue to lose. That number is attached by a visceral reality, not a observation reality.
Yes.
I guess I should say.
Yeah.
You know, these people were directly players in it, and their families, and on so down the line, and that's just by association, so to speak. I remember a couple people calling when they finally got home. You know, I would talk to their wives or whatever and say, I know they got, you know, hey, I'm way down the list. If they need to talk,
sure,
you know where I am. And a couple did. One of them I spent 3 hours on the phone with, and I don't think, if we said 12 words in 3 hours,
right,
because he lost his whole, you know, 2/3 of his company.
Yeah.
But if that's something we could do to help, then, you know, that's why they call it the brotherhood. But it, yeah, you know, it's,
well, thank you.
Those who were directly involved, you know, God bless them, and we can only be a support network for that. But
whatever it takes. But I think the first step and the main mission that we have is just talking about it and keeping it current, and remembering those that did so much for so many others, and so on. And it's just it's certainly something that's important to me, and I really felt that, you know, this project for my podcast on, you know, Monday the 11th of this year, this is one that hearing some stories of people that I truly admire, trust, consider mentors of mine, I appreciate you just taking a few minutes today and just telling me about your story. Thanks, Dave.
Oh, yeah, my honor and pleasure, and may God bless and keep them. And hopefully we don't have to go through anything like that over again.
Well said. Well said. Dave Gallagher, thank you very much for sharing a little bit of your story with me today. Like I said, we caught up the other day on the phone, and that was beautiful.
I appreciate that very much, by the way.
I've done it. I do it not all the time, but it's important to me to catch up with people that I really respect and I consider are very important to me. If I could see you more or talk to you more, I would. But, it's nice that when we do pick up the conversation, it's right where we left off. And it's me hounding you about writing a memoir. So I'm just putting it on record. So now you really can't back down. Yeah. But anyway, Dave.
I'm going to get asked.
Yeah. Dave, thank you. I look forward to seeing you soon. And you take care of yourself. And thank you for sharing a little bit of your story today. Appreciate you.
You too, brother. Be safe and well.
Take care.
Thank you for the
honor.
You
got it. Thanks, care. Dave. Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, guys. So I got Jay Urban on the line. Jay, I prepped you before I called, and I'm really interested in knowing where you were on September 11th of 2001.
All right. So I was working in Warwick. Let's see, about 4 or 5 years on the job. I think I was on Engine 1. And I worked the 10th night tour and had to work the 11th. So it was the day in between my 2 nights when you work 2 days, 2 nights, 4 days off. So I worked my first night. We got crushed. Typical night on the engine. I remember being home on the couch, sound asleep. And my fiance at the time called me, said something's going on, turned the television on. I turned it on and saw what was going on. And rather than stay home and watch it by myself, we usually met a bunch of guys like every day on a day off at the coffee shop down the street. So I filtered in, maybe 3 or 4 guys filtered in after that, and we spent pretty much the whole day until we had to go back to work, just huddled around a very small television on the wall when we could have all been home, watching it at the comforts of our homes. So we just kind of watched it all unfold, and then went into work that night and not really knowing what was going on. Everybody had the expectation like they were going to help. Everybody had that feeling, especially in the Northeast. And I remember going upstairs at headquarters to see Mike Bull Walsh, the deputy chief, and I walked in and he immediately said, "We're not going anywhere." And I turned around and walked out.
Yeah.
I mean, that was pretty much laying it down. But I mean, on a personal, I was getting married 3 days later.
Oh, wow.
14.
I know so many people that had weddings around that time, and some were canceled, some were postponed. Crazy times. Yeah.
We ended up pulling it off, but a few bridesmaids couldn't fly in. We obviously didn't have a honeymoon.
Yeah.
Everything got canceled. I mean, everything was last minute. So we ended up pulling it off, but it was and here I am thinking that, I'm the fireman, and I'm like, well, they're going to need me down there. So we can't have this wedding. I have to go.
Yeah.
It's further from the truth, but that's what, the mindset you're in, like anybody else was, thinking. And I guess the biggest memory I have of it after is a couple of days later, we're all going through it as a crew and everybody's doing their thing. And we went out to fill the boot, to start collecting for the families.
Sure.
And we were out there in rush hour the next day in traffic, 2 days later, and we shut down the city, and to the point where the cops had to tell us to stop because we backed traffic up. So people were just crying and donating, and we're just talking to the public and just doing our part. I mean, that was all we could do. We're a suburban fire department 3 states away. We did as best we could, and you're all trying to hear about the stories of people you might have known and people you come in contact with, people you took classes from. And that was essentially what it was about.
Yeah, the humanity that day and the days that followed, there was this sense of country pride and come together, and all the nonsense literally stopped within our country for the weeks after. And then, of course, like anything, we slowly get back to the norm. I wanted to circle back real quick because I found this really interesting because I have a similar story in some ways of when it happened. We all went to where we needed to be, and that was for us the firehouse, but you went to the coffee shop. And what was it? Why? Like, what drew you there? What did you need from that?
you know what I think I needed, because that was our place that we went all the time.
Yeah.
We went there on our mornings after work, and everybody that worked on the same shift would just go there after work. And, you know, we were young. We didn't really have families then, so it was kind of our thing to go and kind of chill. It was the neighborhood place where I lived, and there were retired guys there. There were people, you know, from, you know, other city agencies that hung out there as well. It was our spot.
Right.
So, I mean, I instinctively went there. I mean, I could have gone to my parents' house and been with my dad. I could have gone this, but I don't know. That's the place where we chose, and it was great to just sit there in silence with people you knew and trusted.
That's it, man. We did the same at the firehouse. I mean, we can see the New York City skyline where I am.
That's true.
And not only that, but our department's radio, our response channel has actually been FDNY citywide, but on a PL, on a private line. And so when you take the PL off, we can listen. And we were listening to the audio in real time while watching it on television, and you could hear a pin drop in that firehouse. But like you said, and you just nailed it, man, it was a place we needed to be. Not a word was really said between any of us, yet there was this need to be there within one another's company, and that is what we all needed.
Yeah, absolutely correct. And that's just, you know, the way it was. And we just did that for years. That's the thing that we do, when you just go to rely on the people that you work with, because you're your second family. And when your, you know, nuclear family at home isn't around, or at work or elsewhere, I mean, it's your default, all right? The fire service is the default.
Yeah.
You go there when you feel most comfortable at times.
Yeah. Well, Jay, thank you. Thanks for sharing that with me. And you know, this is a little project that I wanted to do. People that I love, respect, and appreciate. I want to just hear a little bit about their story on that day, because for me that day is such a standout. Being a part of it, witnessing it, and all of that. So this is my way. On the 11th, we're going to put out a podcast of a mashup of just stories from people that I love talking to. So, brother, thank you for taking my call, and I appreciate you, man. Be safe, and I'll be thinking of you, okay?
Anytime, brother. As always, thank you.
Thanks, Jay. Be good. Bye. Okay, so my next guest on the September 11th podcast, Jeremy Hurst. This is a brother who's retired out of Louisiana, enjoying the good life. Excuse me. He does some editing for us. He does a lot of work for me on the National Fire Radio, and super talented guy who I always enjoy talking to. He's always got this upbeat way about him. And, you know, part of the storytelling here for this podcast is to talk to people from around the country. You know, we've talked to people from California, Texas, Louisiana obviously is not in line with where any of this went down, but I'm curious about their response and their take on that fateful day. And so we're going to give Jeremy a call right now and see if we can get him on the phone, and we're going to get him going here to see what his story is all about. So bear with me 1 second.
Jeremy Dodge.
My brother, how are you?
What's up, man?
Well, you're being recorded, so don't say anything you don't want to say. But you knew that. But listen, man, this is a little bit of a project I'm doing. So right before I called you, I do a little intro on who I'm talking to, and then I say, hey, I'm going to dial them up. So just so you know how this all looks. But I mentioned that you've been doing some work for us, and you're super talented, and I appreciate it. You were on the podcast very long ago.
Right.
Do you even know when that was? How long ago was that?
Probably a year, maybe a year and 6.
Yeah, I bet you it's close to 2 years. I bet, but
yeah, maybe so.
That's pretty wild, man. But I remember we had a great conversation, and since then, you rock some great video skills, editing skills, and so you've done some projects for us and working on some more projects and so on. So I truly value you and what you do for us, and I was curious, you know, I'm talking to guys all over the country, people that I value, and I'm curious about where they were on September 11th of 2001, what part of life they were in, how they heard about it, what their feelings were, their reactions. And it's run the gamut of people that have been on the pile to people that, saw it on TV or they were in college class at the time. So I'm just curious, man, you willing to share a little bit of your story with me?
Yeah, man, absolutely.
Please.
I kind of remember it like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
It was so vivid. And I had just gotten off of a 24-hour shift And at the time, I lived probably an hour and a half from where my firehouse was. So I was just about home, and my part-time called me and asked me. He said somebody was calling in sick. I said, sure, let me go home, shower, change. I'll be back on my way. And I guess it was around 8 o'clock Central Time that I walked through the door of the firehouse. And this firehouse, it's pretty large. They had one at the time, and everybody was inside, glued to the television. And I said, what's going on? And they said, well, they have a fire in the World Trade Center, and FDNY's like just arriving on scene. And that was pretty shocking to hear. And just as I walked up, the second plane flew into the tower. And I mean, my heart sank. Everybody in the room gasped. And we didn't know what was going on, but we knew how serious it was. And I'll never forget that one of the battalion chiefs that was next to us started commenting on things that they were possibly dealing with. And I mean, he was on the money. And then we began to see, more and more units arriving, the same TV broadcast as everybody else. And us thinking, this FDNY, they got this,
Yeah.
That's what they've always done. That's what they do. And we saw the first tower go down, and that was just, it ripped everybody's hearts out right there. I mean, it was so, I don't even, still to this day, I don't have a word to describe that, we all saw the same thing.
Yeah.
And I still don't have the words to describe what we were watching at the time.
I didn't get it.
Horrible.
I didn't get it. I didn't get the whole thing, and we were involved, and it was so hard for me, one, to comprehend that it was terrorism from the beginning. I just, my innocent heart was like, it didn't even dawn on me until somebody said it, and then I was like, oh my God, it makes sense. And then I never thought the buildings could fall. I just didn't. Yeah. I just never, you got to think that there's a few iconic symbols of New York City, which they say is the gateway to America, right? And when you think about New York City, you think about the Empire State Building at the time. You think about the Statue of Liberty, and then you think about the World Trade Center. Those are three iconic symbols of capitalism and freedom and liberty and all of that. And every movie that I've ever seen in the 80s and 90s and before, right? Comedies, dramas, when they take place in New York City, they always open with a shot of the Twin Towers.
Yeah.
And so it's this iconic thing, and there never did it dawn on me while we were watching this unfold, would one of those buildings be able to collapse, let alone both of them?
No, it was the furthest thing from your mind, because initially when I saw it, and I think was it Tower 2 that was hit first?
I believe,
you saw this hole, you saw the fire, and being from where I was at, watching this on television, transpire, you didn't get a real grasp of what you were looking at.
Yeah.
For somebody who's never been there, I'm from Baton Rouge.
Yeah.
I had never been to New York City at the time. And so we fast forward to a year later, they also postponed the National Fallen Firefighters Memorial that year. And they did it the year after. And since then, we had met a few men and women from FDNY and the PAPD, kind of just coming down to an LSU football game and being recognized and things like that. And so when we went back up for the memorial service, we also went to visit them at their firehouses, and the PAPD personnel kind of escorted us around the site. And we got to go down, it was a construction event at that point, but still had no grasp of what we were looking at. And we were standing down in part of the construction. And I want to say we were 11 stories down. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
But I looked up and I said, do we need hard hats or anything like that to be in the areas that we're in? He said, no, don't worry about it. We're not going to any dangerous spot. And I said, well, there's a giant pipe up there. It's got water spewing out of it. He said, it's not a pipe. That's a subway. Wow. And it was so far above us, it just kind of put into scope. And I immediately at that point remember walking through the door of the firehouse and seeing a hole in Tower 2 and somebody saying, somebody flew a plane into it. Can you believe that? And I was like, man, what's a little plane? I had no idea how large.
I get it.
It was.
It was hard to, you're right. You're absolutely right. As I'm sitting here thinking about this, you think about the scale. It's hard to measure scale in actuality when you're watching it on a TV screen.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But you knew, what was going on. We weren't thinking anything about terrorism until you saw that second plane fly in.
Right.
And like, man, that's not an accident. That it just doesn't happen that way. And then the calls, of another plane going down, and then the Pentagon being targeted. And it all started to come together, and I still don't have words to describe that. But I can say that, throughout my career, from that point moving forward, and I just retired a couple of years ago, every member that I have met, from the FDNY and PAPD are just next level, higher caliber person. Like, just without the fire department and all of that, these are just some great men and women that I was lucky enough to meet. And it was just, you still can't believe it happened to this day.
Yeah, I'm with you for sure. I'm curious about, I'm talking to guys from all over the country, and, the impact obviously is different from where you are and, in Louisiana where you are. I'm just curious, being a little bit disconnected, you were seeing this just through media, and that's all you had, right? And so, right. And then the storytelling that comes out of that and so on. I mean, what did you have that sense when you heard, I mean, you told your story a little bit there, but you needed to be at the firehouse, like you needed to be around? Because I know a lot of the conversation I've had with people is when something like this happens, they immediately think they need to be at the firehouse or at a place where they're with people that they need to surround themselves with. And a lot of time, like, nothing's being spoken, but we're all in the same room together, watching it together. And that's what's most important.
Yeah. And that's exactly what happened for us. We have Exxon, a pretty large facility here in Baton Rouge. And a lot of people were just waiting on the other shoe to drop. Like, okay, these things are happening there. What about here? Yeah. And everybody kind of went into that mode. And I remember getting a call from my battalion chief at the time, and he said, hey, just to let you know, we're not calling everybody back, but get your stuff together. And I told him where I was at, and I was like, look, man, I'm on duty today. Somebody called in sick. They still got to cover. It's actually in my current hometown where I was working part-time. And I said, they still need coverage for today. And he said, well, if you want to just come up here, that's fine. If we do call people back, I'm going to need you back. Your company officer on the engine, and they're talking about staging things just in case Exxon goes on alert. I was like, this could happen here.
Yeah.
It
certainly changed the game. Nobody had any inklings of what terrorism could look like this, right?
Right.
I mean, we didn't. I mean, I didn't know that that would even be something that was thought of, and and then it opened up the door to every potential target, and everybody felt that they have targets in their own community, so everybody was heightened. Everybody.
Right. Right. And they did. What wasn't a target at that point?
Right.
That was the feeling that came over everybody.
That's right. That's right.
If this can happen there, it can happen in your backyard.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, that's the gateway to America.
Yeah.
And it's happening.
Yeah.
So it definitely left some real bitter feelings. I didn't know the scope of what I was viewing. But then, afterwards, when you saw all the missing, and that was still, man, it's to this day, I don't have the words to describe it. And I don't think anybody other than people that were there, could actually accurately describe what was going down.
Yeah.
I just know the feelings that I was feeling. And I felt it an honor to be able to participate in the Fallen Firefighters Memorial that year.
Yeah.
And this was 2 years past. And there were so many honor guards and firefighters and families there. I had never heard silence like I had, and I haven't heard it since, when the motor coaches of the family members of the 343 drove past. Now, this is, to set the stage, this is one of the only civilian, I guess you would call it a parade, down Pennsylvania Avenue. And we're all lined up as far as you can see, and the busloads of family members drove in. And they had a picture in the window of, well, some of them did, of the loved one that was lost, and never experienced anything like that before or since. That just really touched everybody that was there, and I'm talking thousands of men and women there to pay honor to him. And when we saw that, it was just made it a lot more real.
Yeah.
You're not participating in an event. This means something to somebody. So, yeah.
A lot there, brother. A lot there. And thank you for
Yeah,
sharing
still get
that.
choked up talking about
Yeah,
it.
well, listen, I mean, it's incredibly emotional, even 22 years later. How could it not be, right?
Yeah.
And, what I find really, not fascinating, but very interesting is even, I used the word disconnected before, and I regret saying that word. I said you were disconnected because you weren't in the immediate area where these things happened, whether at the Pentagon but it's not disconnected. You were very much connected. It was more of just, you're not local to it. And for me, though, here's the thing. It's like hearing your story now and the emotion that comes up in it. You didn't know, you were pretty removed from it, and yet it touched you and those around you. And it didn't matter. Borders didn't matter. It didn't matter where you're from. It's the humanity of it, and it's the job of it. And, for you to be a part of what you've done to recognize and to memorialize those and let their stories and legacy live on is huge. And it affects you to this day. And it's incredible.
Absolutely. And I still haven't, during that, that time of year, every year, I have 2 young daughters, one 13 and one 9, and I still haven't explained that to them, because it's just so heavy. They know what happened. They know what went on. And I haven't explained it to them from my perspective and from the perspective of the men and women that I was fortunate enough to meet that were there.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're ready for that gravity.
I get it. I absolutely get it. I think it's important, though, that they are aware, to what level,
Absolutely.
but, we need to educate our young. We need to make sure that this doesn't get lost and we don't lose the meaning of what happened that day, how the world changed that day, the sacrifices that the firefighters and other first responders made that day, along with our innocent civilians that were, just, I don't know, by chance happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I don't like saying it that way. It's just lack for better words. But, this was just something that randomly occurred and everybody was innocent. They were murdered. And we need to make sure that we don't lose sight of that. We need to make sure that we
Amen.
don't lose sight of the importance of such an event and that the memories of those don't get lost. And, we have a duty.
Absolutely.
We have a duty for that, for sure. I want to ask you one more question before I cut you free. I know it's college football Saturday and you got to get running.
Yeah.
Is there something that you do each year on September 11th that is just you find yourself every year, whether it's taking a moment of silence or a quick prayer, or you make a phone call and call a buddy that you haven't talked to in a while? Like, is there something, or just attending a memorial service? Is there anything you do on September 11th? Are you in a particular mood that day? Is there something that you need for yourself that day? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's usually the night before. And every year since then, I don't get into, all of these posts that are extremely wordy and my viewpoint. Every year on that morning, I just post a list of names and I read it every year. Some of them I know their faces. Most of them I don't. But no explanation needed. It's just a list of names, and that's something that should be remembered for forever,
Yeah.
And it's a list of the 343. And there's nothing that needs to be said,
I do. I think about, I've been asking a lot of the guys that are doing this podcast with me that question at the end. And, it ranges. It's all over. One guy calls a guy that he was with that day. They don't really talk anymore, but every year they connect on that day. Or another guy, remembers the meal they ate and that's something that's memorable to him and they replicate that, or whatever it is. Everybody's got their thing. I think the thing is, whatever it is, don't let that fade away. I think
absolutely not.
It's everybody has their way of dealing with it, in dealing with the impact of it. And it's those moments that, make it real and keep it real for us. And so that the next year we do the same thing again, and that we make sure that we're doing our part to never forget. And Dave Gallagher, who I really, he's really a mentor to me. I highly, highly respect him in so many ways. He said something really interesting to me, and I want to share this because you're going to be one of the last installments on this episode. And so I want to reiterate this. He talks about the week before and the week after September 11th, he wears a T-shirt, a memorial T-shirt that he has. He's got, like all of us, we have so many T-shirts, and part of the thing is in the fire service, like, oh, you're just a T-shirt guy. You're there for the T-shirt, right? But the thing is this: the T-shirt does a couple things, and he mentioned this to me, and it really resonated with me. And I actually thought about it for a long time last night, because I have a lot of my memorial T-shirts have been bound onto boards and they're put on my wall, and they're actually a sound absorbing part of my studio. And I'm looking at them right now, and I have a ton of September 11th shirts on my wall. And, for me, it's a way for me every single time I walk into my recording studio, my office, it's on the wall, and it's a reminder every single day I look at it. And it's a reminder for me. But Dave talks about wearing it, and he goes, and every once in a while, every year or every other year or something, somebody will come up and say something about his shirt. Or it starts a conversation. Hey, you a fireman? You on the job? It's a way to keep the conversation going and making people aware that September 11th is still a wide open wound for so many. And I think, and we can't fault civilians and we can't fault the public for forgetting. They're not involved like we are. And so it's hard. It's hard. We can point blame and say they need to do better, but we need to do better at educating and keeping that conversation alive and going. And if wearing one of those, T-shirts that you purchased 20 years ago, 21 years ago, after September 11th, and you still have one, maybe put it on and be proud of it, and talk about the individual that shirt represents, or talk to your postman, the guy at the ice cream shop, or the guy at your cleaners about it if it comes up in conversation, and take a minute and talk about September 11th, because that matters.
Absolutely. That was the purpose of just posting the roster of that day is, it's not a generalized thing. These people have names.
Yes.
They had families.
Yes.
They were sons, daughters, mothers, fathers, and that matters, that the compassion element to our job. You can be the best firefighter in the world if you don't have that compassion for your fellow man and what they're going through. You're missing something. And so you're right, that does, start some conversations. And I think those are good conversations that needs to be talked about.
Yeah, for sure. Jeremy Hurst, thank you, brother. Thank you for joining me for a few minutes today on the podcast, and just, hearing your story and sharing your story about September 11th. I appreciate you. Thank you for all you do for me and your friendship.
Thank you, brother.
Hopefully in a few weeks when I'm down your way, we can cross paths. It would be nice to see you.
Absolutely. We'll have a great time.
Good, buddy. Enjoy your day. Go LSU. I'll see you later.
All right. You too.
Take
Go
care,
Tigers.
buddy. See ya. Bye.
Bye.
So my next guest on the September 11th episode is District Chief Joe Minahan out of the Boston Fire Department, a decorated firefighter, a man that shared an episode with me a while back, which was just an incredible conversation, a very powerful conversation. And so I value Joe. I value his candidness and his friendship. So I wanted to hear his story. So join me.
Hello.
Chief Jeremy.
Hey, Jeremy. How's it going?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
I cannot complain. It's
You're
the summer vacation and spending time with the kids.
It doesn't get any better than that. That's good. Enjoy them. Squeeze them tight, because it goes quick. My kids are, 15 and 16 are my two youngest now, so it goes very fast. So enjoy it.
14, 12, 10, and 7.
I love it. Those are, all close ages, too.
Yeah, it's pretty all right.
Yeah, I love that. Very cool. Well, Chief, thank you for joining me real quick. What I'm trying to do, I'll explain a little bit. I'm trying to grab, what I'm doing is grabbing some people that I really appreciate, admire, and consider them, special to me. And you're certainly one of those people that the time that we got to share together on the podcast was memorable to me. And so I for September 11th, I'm just trying to capture some stories, 10, 15, 20 minutes of just, people's stories about where they were that day, how it impacted you, some memories and thoughts that you have. So I appreciate you taking a few minutes. I'd love to ask, what's your story from September 11th of 2001?
Yeah. So, I appreciate you having me on. This is, it's great. So September 11th for me, I was actually in the fire academy at the time. And our fire academy is out on a place called Moon Island in Boston Harbor.
Yeah.
So we have a direct line of sight, to Logan Airport.
Okay.
So we'll get to that in a minute. But in the mornings, we typically did our whatever mile run. I think this was a 5-mile run that morning. Came back to the classroom, and our drill master at the time, his name was Hugh Duffy, one of the best of all time, just an absolute goat. I mean, you can't beat this guy. Pulled us all into the classroom. Normally we go take our showers, cool down, whatever. He said, get up in the classroom. We're going to watch some TV. And we all thought this was part of his shtick. This was all, okay, what's going on now?
Sure.
And he said, sit down. A plane just hit the World Trade Center, and it wasn't by accident. And we're like, no, this didn't happen. And then as we're sitting there watching the live feed, the second plane strikes the other tower. And all of us we're trying to figure out what movie this is from and how this, they made it look so real.
Yeah.
And, we were all bewildered is a nice way of putting it. So
I didn't get it. I didn't understand it was terrorism. I was saying that before with Mo Davis. I did not understand that it was terrorism on our turf. I just didn't get it. I thought it was a terrible accident in some way. So sorry, go ahead.
No, that's and I think again, this just him being as great as he was, he just all signs sort of pointed to something bad. And one of the things that to this day that still sticks with me is again, knowing my story and knowing what my family had gone through.
Yeah.
He at the front of the class said, guys, firemen are dying today. And this is still early in the incident. We didn't know anything was going to happen. He said, firemen are going to die today. If anybody wants to walk out of that classroom, we completely understand. And not a single person got up and left. Everybody was all in, and to this day, they're all still all in. So, having a voice like that, and you could hear the somberness in his usual ball busting, drill master type way. He brought us all crashing down to earth, to put it bluntly.
I mean, I can't even imagine. I mean, I'm thinking of so many things, right? So, you suffered tragedy within your own family, within the fire service. And so I have to think that sitting in that classroom that day, I can't even imagine what thoughts were going through your head as he was saying that. But I'm also envisioning the guy next to you that comes from the inner city of Boston that doesn't know anything about the fire service. And this is his indoctrination to it. I mean, he's sitting in the fire academy learning about the fire service as a beginner, and this is what's being told to him.
Yeah, and was the beginning. We started August 16th of that year, and this was September 11th. It wasn't even a month in. We all kind of, we tried to make the day continue, but everyone was just sort of at a loss. And at one point, our drill master said, "Okay, guys, it's time to go do X, Y, Z," and everyone was just like, "Wait, what?" And he again very bluntly was like, "Listen, bad stuff happens to good people, but we still need to get up every day and do our jobs. Yeah. And my job is to get you ready to be firemen." And he persevered, and we went through it. And he was the GOAT.
That's strong. What the bond that your class had. I mean, I have to think the time leading through your academy had to be shadowed by everything that was happening. I'm sure Boston sent a tremendous amount of resources to New York City. I'm sure that there was constant talk about it. You're surrounded by it, and you're still living out and getting involved in your own Proby years or Proby weeks in the academy. I mean, it just had to be consuming.
Yeah. So for us, it started, that day, he said, everybody grab the gear that you've just been issued and fitted in last week. Take it home with you because you may be going to work. We don't know how far this is going to extend. And that's when it got really real for a lot of us. Like, oh crap, like we're brand new. And I had the fortune of like spending a couple days in a firehouse here and there throughout my life. And I was kind of at a loss. But now we're being told, okay, guys, you may be going to work tomorrow. The academy may be over, and we may be at war, basically. And that was hard to swallow for me anyway. Yeah. As a non-military guy, I didn't have that background.
I remember how confused I was. I was so confused over all of it. And being a witness to it up front and close, from the shoreline of New Jersey as it all transpired. It's amazing how the story of what transpired that day, everybody's got these incredible stories about where they were and where, it's one of those moments in time that nobody will ever forget, right? There's certain moments in time that people just don't forget. And this is certainly one of them. How impactful was it for you? Like, did it make you refocus? I guess I'm trying to ask, like, you know, did it put things in perspective a little bit more for you? Did it pull people together? Did your Proby class come together a little bit tighter? Is there, you know, things like that you can remember?
Yeah, I would say we came together more so than, you know, we weren't a huge class by any stretch. We weren't a small class, but you know, to this day, I can remember. I talk to guys who don't remember I think that guy was in my class. I'm not sure.
Yeah, right.
And I know everybody that was in my class, and I can tell you where they are today, because we do keep in touch, and we do take interest in each other's lives, because we did live that very personal time. Even though we weren't connected to it, we were all kind of forced to be connected to it.
That makes sense. It absolutely makes sense. What do you do now, 22 years later? I mean, you know, this is, you've had an incredible career. You're a district chief now in Boston. Every year when September 11th comes around, it's going to be Monday this year. Anything you do that's memorable for you, something that you know, whether you keep in touch with the guys that you were in the academy with, or do you just take a moment of silence? Is there something that you do that's typical of your, you know, of in remembrance or just thoughts about that day?
I kind of, you know, I try to make sure my kids know the stuff, you know, the heroism that went on that day. Not so much the bad stuff. I don't want them to know, you know, about the bad people that did
Sure.
bad things to good people, as much as, you know, they'll learn all that eventually. But I want them to remember that people made a difference that day, and that thousands of folks are alive because, you know, 343 brothers gave their lives for that cause. And I make sure that they know that. And, you know, we have those, we have a couple of those, you know, books that have been written afterwards that are designed towards kids. And I make sure all my kids have read that a few times. You know, they need to be aware that good people exist.
I could not agree with you more. I think that is one of the missions that we all are responsible to do. And the fact that, like, when I talk to my kids, I mean, I go to the same ceremony every September 11th, which is a potluck dinner in Wyckoff, New Jersey. And I go every year, and I think I've missed twice since September 11th of 2001. And the one was because my kids were starting in a new school, and it was back to school night. And I felt that I had to go for my kids, even though I was really, I mean, literally torn up about missing that dinner and that ceremony, because it means so much to me and what it represents. And you know, somebody that was Dana Hannon, who was lost that day, and so on. I had such connections to this event that I always needed to be there every year. And they had a back to school night for my daughter's new school. I had to go, and I was really upset about it. My wife knew I was really torn, but I felt that I needed to be there for my daughter and all these things. Fast forward, the principal sees me, and he knew who I was, and he comes up and he says, "Hey, Mr. Donch." He puts his hand out, shake my hand, and I shook his hand, and I pulled him in very close to me. I literally grabbed his hand in a handshake and pulled him in close, and I'm probably standing 6 inches from his face, and I go, "Listen, tonight's September 11th. I'm not sure why you or the school board chose to do this on tonight." I go, "But you're making myself and my kids miss a ceremony that is important to my family, and I had to choose my children over the memory of 9/11. And I go, "This is wrong." I said, "The school needs to respect this day. The school needs to do better." And he looked at me, and he didn't know what to say, and he almost, like, not welled up, but he knew, he felt the power of that conversation when I said that to him. And he looked at me and he said, he's like, "Mr. Donch, I'm sorry, just scheduling and this and that." I said, I don't care about scheduling. I said, "We need to do a better job. We cannot forget. You know, never forget means never forget." I didn't say that to him, but I said, "We can't forget. We can't forget." And with that, I let him go, and he backed up and like ran away. Well, and I was upset. I was upset, and I was angry because people in that room that night forgot all about it.
Well, that's it, right? We talk about never forget, never forget, never forget. And then, you know, 2 weeks after, and this isn't just 9/11, but 2 weeks after a tragic event, everybody forgets.
Life moves on.
And, you know, some right, wrong, and different. I mean, we may need to accept that sometimes that happens, but
sure.
I refuse to let my kids forget. You know, they weren't even there. So, I mean, how can they they can't remember, but it's ingrained in their heads. And if I say what happened on September 11th, they know, right?
Yeah.
My 9-year-old boy can tell me what happened because he's heard the stories.
And he should. Every 9-year-old should know what happened that day and the heroism that was performed. And not only that, but Chief, I think one of the biggest things that came out of that was the weeks that followed. There was nothing happening within our communities. There was no division. There was no divisiveness. This was everyone came together. Every color, every race, every ethnicity. Crime stopped. All of it. We came together as one in a commonality of tragedy. And I'll tell you, man, it was certainly a memorable time, and so on. And I just I don't know. I really appreciate you though sharing that. I didn't know you were in the academy at the time. That's pretty interesting. That's an interesting story for sure.
And that's funny when you talk about the weeks and stuff that follow, right? The Logan Airport.
Yes. Oh, that's right. You mentioned that. Yes.
Was shut down, right? There wasn't a plane taking off.
Well, one of the planes involved left from Logan, did it not? I believe.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So the day that Logan opened up again, right? We were in the middle of, we were doing what we called up and overs, where you climb up a ladder, across a roof ladder, down the ladder, and then onto another ladder. And all of a sudden we hear this plane take off, and everybody stopped, including the drill master and all the instructors, and we all just kind of looked at the sky like we had never seen an airplane before.
Wild.
Because
yes,
we hadn't realized how quiet things had been until the plane took off. And you go, oh my God, like this is the first plane. We're witnessing, in a sense, we're witnessing a little bit of history. This is the first time a plane has taken off post 9/11 from Logan Airport, and we all watched it. And it was like a bunch of kids who had never seen, an airplane take off before, just stop and stare.
You're 100% right. I didn't even think of that. My wife talks a lot about the fighter jets because of where we are. The fighter jets were circling Manhattan, and they were going up and down the Hudson River, come around the south bend of Manhattan Island. They'd go up the East River, come around the Bronx, and they would just circle. They were circling and circling. Fighter jets are not quiet, man. My wife, who was home while I was at the firehouse and then, involved in responding and all these different things. But my wife's home with my two older kids who were tiny, like little kids at the time. And she was upset. People were upset. People are sitting on the front steps in the neighborhood. They're just like community and a sense of like sadness, but this overwhelming pro-America and pride. And it was an incredible time. But the planes, I forgot about not seeing an airplane in the sky for like 3 days or something like that, wasn't it? 3-4 days?
Yeah, it was. I can't remember exactly, but it was. I'll tell you when it took off, watching it take off and hearing it, and
I could only imagine. Yeah,
it was like a record scratch, or a screeching of a record.
Right.
Everyone turned their heads.
Wow, yeah. I believe it. Well, today we take the noise of airplanes flying overhead for granted. We don't even look up. And
absolutely.
And back then that was had a whole different meaning. So Chief Joe Minahan, thank you for sharing your story with me today. I appreciate you very, very much.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for never forgetting.
We can't. We have one job, and that is to remember those that have come before and have set the stage for us. And if we can do anything, it's never forgetting, so we can give them the gratitude and legacy that they deserve. So, Chief, thank you for joining me, man. I appreciate you as always. Have a wonderful weekend, and it was good catching up with you for a few minutes.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Cool. Thanks, Chief. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Okay, so my next guest on the 9/11 special, September 11th, 2001 special on the podcast, Cameron Gangbin, a captain in Napa, California with CAL FIRE. I met him on an absolute chance encounter while Terry and I were touring Napa Valley for a few days. An absolute gentleman, somebody that I very much highly regard as a good, solid person, an aggressive, great boss and firefighter, and he's always smiling, living that California BMX lifestyle. I love this guy, and I'm excited to talk with him. So let's see if we can capture Cameron's story.
Hey there.
My man.
Hey, buddy.
It's so good to connect with you. Ran your episode, a replay episode the other day. Did you see that, by the way?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Oh, no, I didn't. You ran it on your... No, I didn't.
Yeah, we posted it, I think last week. I ran it as a replay because I'm running some of the old episodes again because I want them to get another run through. And I put yours up because yours, man, towards the end, you were fired up and talking some good stuff, man. So always an absolute pleasure to connect with you. Before I called you, I gave a little intro about who you were, and then I dialed the phone. So when you listen to this, you'll hear all that. But I was talking about how a chance encounter in Napa Valley, California, turned into just this incredible back and forth that you and I have when we have the opportunity to do that. And I want you to know that I'm grateful for the friendship and relationship that's come from this. And I just appreciate you very much. And so part of that is for me, for the September 11th podcast this year, I'm just capturing stories of people that I really respect and hold high in regard in my life. And you're one of those guys. And I just really wanted to capture your story, whether it was, shopping at the supermarket or something, just on a mega, latitude situation. I'm curious about where my friends were that day. And so curious if you would share your story with me.
Sure, and I just appreciate all the nice stuff you said. I feel the same way about you too. And it's kind of uncomfortable for me to talk about this only because on the West Coast, I wasn't affected.
I get it.
The chain of events. It's like, how does this relate to where I was? Like, it really doesn't. But where I was is, since I'm in California, we were 3 hours behind. So
Yeah.
It happened about 5:45 in the morning when the first plane hit the tower, and I was in bed. I woke up when I realized what was going on. I heard the chatter from my roommates about 6:30 in the morning. At that time, both planes had hit the towers.
Right.
And so I kind of woke up to the chatter, what's going on, went out to the living room, and just like the rest of the world, I just watched it unfold on the news, and replay and repeat. But what was significant about 9/11 and me personally is that I had just gotten to the fire service that June. So I was only a couple months into being a firefighter. It was new. It was exciting. I knew like the moral character that it took.
Sure.
Well, I had an idea of what the moral character it took to be a firefighter, but that day changed the way the world looked at the fire service, looked at firefighters, how we act, how we behave, and what's expected of us. And I was kind of like wondering if I was going to be able to really measure up to that. Like, I had my own ideas, but this changed everything. I mean,
It really did. I mean, it changed the narrative across the board, right? For the more senior guys that have been on the line for many years, right? So I'm interviewing a lot of different guys from all over, and I was really curious your story because I know you're a little bit younger, and so I was, and on top of that, being on the West Coast, I know that the impact was very much different there. Plus, with the time change, I mean, your story is very different from mine, and that's what I'm looking to capture. And I'm curious. So you said you came into the fire service in June of that year.
Yeah. June 2001.
So, were you still in Proby? Like, were you still in Proby class,
Yes.
or were you okay?
Yes. Yeah, for my small town in Calistoga, I was still considered my 1 month probation. They gave me different gear and a goofy looking helmet, so I was still wearing that stuff. Yeah.
So I have to think then you have this expectation of what the fire service is, and then this happens, and
Yes.
it really changed the narrative. And like I was saying, the saltiest of guys, all of a sudden, it put things in perspective a little bit more. That things can get out of control very quick, and bad things can happen. And then for new people coming in that really didn't know what to expect, all of a sudden there's this tremendous sense of responsibility. Like, I don't know what the word is. What were you feeling?
Well, I don't know how to explain it, but I know that I was getting a lot of credit for something I hadn't done. So like I was being kind of put in this, like, automatic hero, but I hadn't earned it. Like, I was like, oh, you're a firefighter. Oh, you're the, and it was the public's idea of what we do and what they expect that I was seeing. But inside I was knowing, like, I haven't earned this yet. I haven't done anything. I've probably been to a car crash and a bunch of medical aids at this point. I hadn't really done anything to where I felt like I had earned any sort of that light, at the time. So like, And then, I felt really kind of distant, from the event. I mean, don't get me wrong, the whole country, the whole world was impacted that day. But now, getting older and talk to people who, lost
Sure.
loved ones in that, and it has a whole different meaning today than it did that day.
I totally get it. I mean, I absolutely understand that. And I'm hearing the stories of so many. I was talking to District Chief Joe Minahan out of Boston, and he was in the Proby class, which is on, I think they said Moon Island, which is right by Logan Airport. And he's in that Proby class on September 11th, 2001. And his class got very real very quick, because all of a sudden it was like what you thought you knew about the fire service, and now you have the salty drill instructors telling you, like, people are dying, firefighters are dying. Wow. And, it puts the conversation, it makes it very real. And I talked about this with many people that have shared their story with me now on this project. We went from a day of innocence. We went from a day of, just normalcy and to something that was completely unfathomable at that time.
Absolutely.
Changed the game.
Yeah. I was a young 23, so I was just very naive, haven't really grown up to be a man yet. So, when it unfolded, I couldn't even grip what was going on. Like, I'm still naive, like, still thinking it's an accident. Even after the second plane, like, I'm just like, I still couldn't wrap my head around how this world, I felt so safe and protected. And after that, it was the way I looked at the world was different. And then, of course, the next 20 years of, what unfolded, it's a different world.
For sure. And, I was curious too, with the time delay, and you guys obviously on the West Coast were waking up to it as things were unfolding. There was this, delay. So you came into it when it was, full speed ahead. And I can't imagine. I know how I was and what I was doing, but man, I couldn't. It just was one of those things. And for you to be 3 hours behind, that just waking up and coming to and seeing this unfold. I mean, it's God, I can't even imagine. I can't. It's hard.
Yeah, I was awake by the time the North Tower, with the first tower, started to fall, and that was like, that was shocking. So I was up and kind of watching the planes hit and loop on the news, and then the first tower fell, and I remember just like, I just see it vivid. And then, like, afterwards, like, I was still very new to the fire service, but I knew what a pass alarm sounded like, and then you just hear them in successions, and it was just like, it just got, man, whew.
Did you in the firehouse, since you were so new, I mean, the more senior guys that were there that have time on the job and so on, what was those conversations when you came back to the firehouse?
It really wasn't anything. I think we're all shell shocked. We didn't really talk about it. We just kind of all watched it unfold together. I think, back then we had internet, but it wasn't the information we get nowadays.
Oh, right. Absolutely.
I had to come in, and it came from the news. And so, there's a lot of speculation. So for the first couple, at least in the first week, it was just a lot of confusion and just kind of shell shock. It was just, there wasn't really much talk about it, like at the firehouse. I mean, there was talk about what was going on nationally, but not really about the incident. We didn't really have a lot of information. We just saw what was on the news.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. So let me ask you this then. Every year, it's been 22 years since. Every year, September 11th comes around. Is there something that you do that's just, whether it's a moment of reflection or, a conversation, or you give somebody a phone call, or is there something that you do just to, I don't know, that seems to be your go-to on September 11th of every year?
I have a strong belief. I have a strong belief in God, and so I do a lot of praying. I do that every day, and especially 9/11. But with this one specifically, we have a bunch of events that we do within the county, and so our fire department will usually participate in one ceremony or another. They used to, here on the West Coast, it's such a shame that we used to do something big every year, and as the time ticks by, it's less and less, and that's I kind of woke up this morning kind of upset thinking about, this conversation and thinking of all the stuff that was done as a community. And now, our newer generation doesn't even know about 9/11. Like, it's barely talked about in schools. My friend's a school teacher. They say they don't talk about it much. And I was thinking how we all used to get together, ring the bell and read the names, and everyone stand at attention in silence. And we had, we made it. And then every year it just seems to get less and less and less. And then, like, I remember the theme was like, never forget,
Yes.
maybe it's just our generation, but I think a lot of it, maybe, it hasn't been over here. It doesn't seem like it's acknowledged as much as it was just 10 years ago.
You're not alone. I mean, we had a front row seat to it here in New Jersey where I am, and people have forgotten. I told a story earlier on this podcast about back to school night on September 11th, and I was upset about it because it made me miss a ceremony that I've been going to for years and years. I've only missed it twice, and the school made me decide between supporting my daughter or the events of September 11th and those that were killed that day and their memory. And I was upset, and I pulled the principal in nice and close with a handshake, and I told him how I felt. We need to do a better job. We need to do a better job. We need to educate. We need our children to know. And if the schools aren't doing it, we should be doing it anyway at home. On September 11th, it should be a memorialized day. It should be get out, go to your community, do something good, and have some remembrance. And I'm a firm believer in that. I think everybody needs to know about the legacy, about those that have fallen and what they did and the sacrifices they made that day, as well as the innocent people that were taken, the civilians that were taken that day just for going about life. Super important, brother. Super important.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, every September 11th they starting with the shows, and my wife and I, we can't even watch them anymore. They're just so like that where it starts to roll out the chain of events, and the first couple years, just like when it started unfolding on the news, it was you just couldn't get enough of it, like the hurt and the pain. But now it's like it's so unbearable to watch those events. Watching them unfold, it's so vivid. It seems like it's yesterday.
Yeah, I also think too it's become very commercialized, which is upsetting to me.
That's it.
And I don't like I don't like how the attention gets poured on that day, and then September 12th we've already moved on. We need to do a better job, and I know it hits differently too. I was just talking about this also, and I get your take on it, but it does hit different between the public and firefighters, right? It just hits us differently.
It does.
Yeah.
It does, and especially, I got to, go over to New York, and I got to do the memorial with the FDN guy who works for the FDNY down at 114, and so he kind of took me through the memorial, and that that had an impact. Definitely not the one I had on him, but like watching him go through it.
Of course.
Like, I just kind of realized how detached I really was from the event, and then the impact it did have on the community.
Sure.
And the fire department. It was
sure.
You go downstairs and turn the corner and see ladder 3 there, and I got to find out like who Patty Brown and Andy Fredericks were, and all these folks, it's like, man.
But you know what? You've done your homework, and you might have been detached that day because you were 3,000 miles away and 3-hour time difference, but you've put in the work to learn the stories and to understand the sacrifice of that day. And, that is so important, and that needs to be shared. And that's why I'm doing this today. I just, I didn't,
doing it.
Yeah, it's important to me. It is. I love stories. I love storytelling. And these are stories that I'm very proud to have conversations with people that I really respect and cherish. And so, my man, thank you. Thank
you, Jeremy.
Thanks for taking 15 minutes of your day, man. And always good to catch up with you too. It is,
man. Truly. I just love what you're doing. Keep it going, man. I love the content. Love your guests, man. I'm so backed up. I just listened to the Jared Man, and man, you got some great episodes.
You know what's really cool? I'm not gonna lie. I feel like I'm getting better at it, and I love episodes where I get done with it and I go, that was good. I'm like, I felt good, right? It just flowed well. The conversation was good. I got the one today that dropped, Sean Egan's is very good. And then next week, Corley Moore and I got back together and we ripped. We went full throttle for over an hour. And that one's coming out next week. So, killer.
Yeah, I love it. Love it. I feel like I hang out with you more on the podcast than I talk to you on the phone. So it feels like we hang out a lot. So.
Well, listen, man, call or text anytime. Don't be a stranger. I'm going to wave to you next Saturday, a week from tomorrow. I'll be landing in San Francisco. And then from San Fran, I'm flying over to Maui. And we're gonna go document the fires in Lahaina and interview the Maui brother and sisters that were affected by those fires. And this is going to be just an incredible trip. And I'll be in San Fran next Saturday, buddy. I'll be thinking of you.
If you need anything, let me know. I'm close by.
I know that. Thank you. Listen, thank you for being a part of this, and thank you for being my friend. And enjoy your weekend, pal. Take care.
You too. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks, Cameron. Bye. Bye. So this next one, Mo Davis, a dear friend, somebody I highly respect in the fire service. District 68, District Chief out of Houston, Texas. Let's give him a call.
Hey, what's going on, brother?
Chief, how are you?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thanks for taking my call, and thanks for spending a few minutes with me, man. It was great to catch up with you last night, just through text for a few minutes, kind of prompting you to hop on this call with me real quick. And I just want to grab you for, quick 15 minutes or so.
Man, I love it. Anytime I get to talk to you, I like it.
I love you, man. You always make me smile, make me feel good, and that's what it's all about, man. Is propping each other up, right? I think we need that. We need it.
That's the brotherhood, man.
Yeah. So this Monday is September 11th. 22 years since that fateful day in New York City. You're down in Houston. You've been a fireman and now district chief down there for many years. You've become a dear friend of mine. And so what I wanted to do with this project when I put out my September 11th podcast is I really just wanted to talk to people that I admire, people that I are contemporaries and people that are definitely bringing a lot to the game when it comes to the American Fire Service. So I'm just curious about your story on September 11th of 2001, where you were, how you heard about it, etc. I'd love to hear your story.
Man, I appreciate that. And man, I'm going to actually love getting this story out because so I was on the ambulance that day, myself and Herb Henderson. We had made an early morning run, and like most trips on the ambulance, we knew the best places to eat. So we went to we went to a little bit nicer area of town than where we worked in. So we were in the lounge eating, and I saw a plane fly into the building.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow. And so I was sitting there, and I saw the second one do it. And my initial thought, as silly as this is, I looked at Herb and I said, man, I think the computer system's down with guiding the planes.
Yeah.
And he said, you're crazy. We're under attack. I never will forget him saying that.
I didn't get it either. I didn't put it together.
No, I mean, not in a million years where I thought anybody would have ever attacked us on our homeland.
Absolutely.
And it's just so instantly it was bad. And I saw the fire. And so we got in the ambulance. We went back to the station. By the time we got back to the station, things was getting worse and worse and worse. And we saw the collapse.
Yeah.
And I can remember just a gut wrenching feeling like, I didn't know how many people were dead. And I just kept thinking that we saw these guys walking up to the building. And after it happened, I thought to myself, they had to know that they may be walking to their death.
Right.
And it just shows you how good firemen really are.
Mm.
And so we got put on lockdown. The city, as far away as Houston is from New York City, we got shut down.
Sure.
The stations were locked down. We have a lot of chemical plants, large medical center, and I can remember the FBI was real active, and we were getting updates. So my senior captain assigned me to the computer room, and it was a teleprinter back then.
Yeah.
And anything I thought was important, I would take off the teleprinter and take him and the captain, and they would review it.
Wow. So
as busy of a city as Houston is, it's like we stopped running that day. And the FBI, we were thinking that chemical plants, that we were worried about that. And there was an FBI agent that was at the chief's house, and he said, there's no way that's our biggest concern. He said, our biggest concern right now in Houston is the water supply to the medical center. he said millions of people could get killed with very little effort with a water supply here.
Jeez.
And so it just seemed like anything that I was thinking that day wasn't clicking to what really was going on. And
I had such a hard time with it too. I really did. Yeah.
I mean, you're just sitting there and you're watching it, and they would show it over and over, and it hurt just as bad the first time as it did the last time you saw it. So in the city of Houston, we have what's called love phones that firemen pay for because we can't use the city fire phone.
Right.
And I didn't have a cell phone back then. And I can remember they let us call our family, and I call my wife, told her we was going to be tied up for the day. And it was just like everything stopped and everything was in slow motion, and just sitting there. And I just went over and over and over that we will never be the same. And then I start thinking about, how is New York City going to recover?
Yeah.
How is the fire department going to hit reset and fix this? I mean, being a fireman, we fix things.
Yeah.
There's nothing we can't fix. And I can remember as a young kid fireman thinking, how do we fix this? And, and like every anniversary date, I will always sit and just think about, how sad it made me when it happened. And I think about it. And, my wife and I went for the 10-year anniversary. We went to New York to visit.
Oh, wow.
And, I mean, it's just unexplainable. I can't imagine. I cannot imagine a firefighter in the Northeast. I mean, I am, several thousand miles away, and it ripped our department's heart out.
Well, and that's what I wanted to ask you, and that's why I'm kind of doing this, right? Because what happens is I had a front row seat that day, right? My home, literally, I pull out of my driveway, I go 2 miles down the road, I hop on the state highway that's by my house, and it's overlooking the skyline of New York City. I mean, that's how close I am.
Wow.
And you talk about that helpless feeling, Mo, and I talked about this with a couple other people now on that's going to be on this program. I talked about how we were dispatched to go. They shut down the bridge. We couldn't get across the bridge, and we were defeated in the attempt to go help and serve, and we had to watch the towers burn from the back of the rescue truck, open doors as we're returning to quarters.
I cannot imagine.
There was this sense of defeat, and it just until I really started analyzing and talking about this with some of the guests that will be on this episode, I never really put that into perspective until another one of our guests said, hey, we went there and there was nobody to help. And it tore them apart. And, it's just in the Northeast. And that's why I wanted to do this, because down in Houston, Texas, what was the impact? What did you feel? How did it affect you? Because here it tore all of our communities apart. Every community lost members in the community. Families lost fathers and mothers. Yeah. And then all the firefighters. Never did we think that we would lose 343 firefighters in one shot.
At one blink of an eye.
Yes.
And you know what? Not only losing firefighters, losing the best of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the best companies that has ever put a pair of quick hitches on and made a response.
Yes.
Was just destroyed and killed that day, murdered that day.
Yeah.
For no reason.
Yeah.
And so here, Texas is a very prideful place.
Sure.
Texas is 100% Texas, 100% American. And then you take being a fireman, 100% fireman, you're just ripped, and you're like a puzzle that's just been ripped apart.
Yes.
And you feel helpless. You're like, you want to help, but what do you do?
Yeah.
And then after that, our rescue companies, Texas Task Force, they started gathering up. They knew that they would probably go help. Houston Fire Department sent a lot of people to help. Sadly, we lost Captain Tortorese from lung cancer, and they contributed to his time.
9/11 cancer.
It sure was. And such a nice guy. And a friend of mine just retired. Chief Cole just retired, and that was one of the things I always respected about him. I can remember as a young fireman, I seen a picture of him up there helping in his task force uniform. And I just thought, so far away, the brotherhood just extends out, and it's like we could feel the pain that they were going through. And then all of a sudden you start thinking, well, if it can happen there, it can happen here.
Yes.
And still to this day, when you think about it, or you're around some of our friends and they start talking about that dreadful day, you're just like, it can happen again.
Yeah.
And, and you just think of as morbid as this sounds, you think about the legends that was taken from us, and you think about what they could have done for our profession. And I think we have a great profession.
Yeah.
But just think if we could have had several more years with some of those guys.
Absolutely.
It's just, Ray Downing. I could just go on and
Chief
on
Feehan.
and on.
I mean, it just goes on and on. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what would have happened to this great profession if we would have had those guys leading some young kid like me in the future?
Yeah.
So, that's when I think of that, first of all, I get mad. I can't believe anybody would do this to this great country.
That's the innocence, man. Like you and I cut from the same cloth. Like never did I think that this would be, that something like this could happen. And that's why it didn't resonate with me that day that this was terrorism. Like I had no idea. I didn't get it.
I didn't either, brother.
Yeah.
I didn't either. I can still remember telling Herb, and he was such a good partner. And I told him, I said, man, I think the computer systems are down.
Makes sense, right?
Yep. And he brought me back to reality, and then everything just changed. And on our way back, we were outside the city. On our way back in the city, it's just like nothing was said.
Yeah.
Nothing was said.
Yep.
You just know.
Yep.
So, and some of mine are your friends.
Mm-hmm.
I never really talk about it when they're around.
Right.
I've heard a few stories because what can you say to them?
That's right.
I mean, what could you say? I mean,
That's
you want to
right.
hug them, and here it is 20 years later, and the hurt's still there. The loss is still there. And we've recovered well, but we'll never fully recover.
Well, that's the thing, right? The one thing about the fire service, right? The resiliency, right?
Yeah.
You can kick
back.
us. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's you kick us and you kick us hard.
Yeah.
And we come right back. I mean, could you imagine Chief Norman showing up?
Exactly.
And then they say, hey brother, this is yours. You got to fix it.
Yeah.
And that's a pat on his back.
Yes.
If I can squirrel out on you for just a second.
Yeah.
There is no other profession in this world, I don't care who it is or what they do, could have fixed that.
No.
Like a firefighter, a New York City firefighter, Chief John Norman fixed it. And I know he had a lot of help from a lot of other firemen, but no other profession would have been able to do it. You couldn't have let a politician do it.
No.
Nobody in this world could have fixed that other than a fireman.
Very well said, Chief. I want to ask you one last question before I let you go.
Yes, sir.
I don't want to hold you.
No.
Is there something you do each year on September 11th? Do you just take a moment and say a prayer? Do you watch the programming?
Yeah, I do. I grew up in a Catholic family. My mom is real faithful and pushed us to be that way.
Yeah.
So I usually get by myself, even if I'm at work, if I'm not on a run, and I give myself a little bit of time to reflect. And just basically, in a strange way, I just thank those guys for what they did. And whenever you hear them tell firefighters to evacuate, and they said no, we still got victims, we're going up. So in the back of my mind and in my heart, I just say, man, what can you say? Thanks. I am so honored that I'm just like a little dot in this great profession because of people like that.
I love it. Very well said, Chief.
All right, brother.
Mo Davis, thank you, brother. It's always so
thank
great
you for letting me
to
be
talk
a small
with you.
part of this, because it means a lot to me, and I think the world of you. You know that.
Thank you. And I appreciate everything about you and our friendship. And we got to get together soon. It'd be good to see you again soon.
Yes, sir.
Thank
Be
you,
safe,
brother. I appreciate you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
All right. My next call is somebody, again, very special to me. Chief Rich Thode, retired departmental chief out of Bridgeport, Connecticut, now the chief in Danbury, Connecticut. 40 years in the fire service, an unbelievable just person, and has become a dear friend of mine. Somebody, again, that I don't get to talk to enough. And when I do, it's always just a memorable conversation and enjoyment when I'm with him. So let's get him on the phone right now. I want to give Chief Thode a call, and I want to hear his story.
Good afternoon.
So formal. Chief Thode, how are you, sir?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. I am recording. You're already on the show, so there's at least you didn't pick up and yell at me or anything. You know, call me any names. I appreciate that.
Never.
So a little bit of a project I wanted to do for September 11th. I wanted to kind of document just some stories of people that I truly respect and appreciate and who've been important to me since we've started National Fire Radio. And of course, you know, you are one of those guys that are important to me. And I just think it would be interesting to hear your story. Nothing too crazy or long, but just a quick conversation about where you were that day and your memories of it.
So I was working my side job, which is at the time was working for an environmental contractor pulling oil tanks. And me and this other guy were in a dump truck with an excavator on a trailer. And the other guy was a Marine sergeant who had just gotten out of the Marines. He's since become a policeman, and we heard on the radio on the local station, hey, we'll have more about that plane in New York City that hit the World Trade Center. So we were pulling up to the job. I said, let's listen on 880 on AM news radio. We switched over and we sat in the truck for probably 40 minutes and listened 45 minutes to an hour and listened to the whole thing, including the first tower collapse.
Wow.
Sitting in the truck. There's a knock on the window of the truck and a woman is in tears. And she said, are you guys listening to this? And we said, yeah. And she goes, can you come in and watch it? And we went in some house in a neighborhood.
Really? And
basically watched the second tower on the news with this random woman in her living room.
Wow.
So then we left. We went back to work, said, you know, we went back to the shop. I went to work. I called the firehouse, and I told you some of the old timers that worked in Bridgeport, but I called and said, you know, what are we doing? And they said, nothing.
Yeah.
You know, just sit tight. So the next day I went to work. On the 12th, I went to work, and the phone calls started coming in. You know, Chris Blackwell's missing. Dana Hannon's missing.
Yep.
Like all these guys that I knew. And I kept saying, what are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing? And the bosses kept saying, we're not doing anything. We're not going. Don't go. If you go, you're on your own. If you get hurt, we're going to fire you. Like all of this kind of stuff. And the more they said it, the more a group of us said, we have to go.
Yeah.
We just have to go.
Right.
So we got off work at 4. That was on the afternoon of the 12th. We walked to the train station. We got on the train. Metro North had a car for firefighters only. So it was just like maybe 10 of us from Bridgeport.
Yeah.
We took the train down. We got out of the train. There were MTA cops. They're like, hey, firemen, just keep walking right up this pathway. We walked to 42nd Street. There was an MTA bus for firemen only. And it was still just only us. It wasn't any other guys. We got on the bus. We drove to the west side, down the West Side Drive. People are cheering and clapping. It was really bizarre.
Yeah.
You know, we're not FDNY. We're kind of intruding, but you had to go. You had to be there.
Right.
So we went down to like as far as Chelsea Piers. We couldn't get down any further. We got off the bus and some guy says, you know, come with us. And I'm like, okay. And we walked out on a pier and it was all these police boats and they put us on a immigration and control, the ICE.
Yeah.
They put us on an ICE police boat, you know, like a 40-foot real police boat.
Yeah.
Drove us out into the river and down, and we pulled into the marina right there at Battery, you know, where the little sailboats are there
absolutely.
by the arch.
Sure.
We pulled in there, and that was the first time it really hit like where we were. because all of the boats were covered in like 2 inches of dust.
Yeah. When you were headed down south in the Hudson River, right? Tell me about what you were seeing, the process. I mean, how hard, I know how hard it was for me to process it all. How hard was it for you?
It was still really smoky. So
Yeah,
there was,
right.
I wouldn't say it obscured it, but it was just surreal because, and you'll hear this from everybody, it was so beautiful out. The weather was gorgeous.
Yes.
I mean, I'm on the Hudson River in a boat like at 5 p.m. It was gorgeous looking over at New Jersey. And then you just turn back and it's like,
yeah,
what is going on? It was so, the weirder part was we get off the boat in the marina and we walk into that glass atrium and we come out on the other side, and I don't know the names of those buildings, but there's those like beige, they're probably 40 or 50 stories
right
on that side. And there's a piece of steel sticking out of like 8 or 9 stories of the building. And we went in the first floor, but when we got to the side where the trade center was, we had to climb out windows that were on the 3rd floor onto the pile. Wow. And it was pitch black.
Wow.
And literally, when we went in the building, it was a gorgeous summer afternoon. And when we came out the other side of the building, it was
like a time warp. Like you walking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
And there was, that by then people were writing in the dust. If anybody's seen this one, if anybody's seen that one, they were writing in the dust in the building.
Yeah.
And we stepped out, and we were with Billy Hogue, who was a retired chief from our job, tough old guy. And Billy said, all right, all you guys stay here. And he went, he found some FDNY chief. I don't even know who it was. And he said, look, son, I got 10 good guys from Bridgeport, Connecticut, and they're ready to do whatever you need them to do. And the chief told him, all right, come here. And he grabbed a captain. I don't know his name, but it was the captain of 105. And he said, take these guys and go. And the captain walked us over, and I'll send you the picture if I want. I don't have it up. It's in my basement. I don't have it displayed, but he said, hey, and we turned and he took a picture of us, the 4 of us on the pile, and said, your grandkids will, now I'm getting choked up.
Yeah.
He said, your grandkids will never believe you were here. So, and we just worked with 105 digging all night, just doing what we had to do. And then in the morning, as the sun was coming up, it kind of, things were starting to get a little more organized.
Yeah.
And it was clear this was not going to be a rescue operation. And at that point, we all kind of started to feel like we were intruding. Like we all felt the need, we had to go. But then once we were there and we had been there for a while and FDNY was kind of, getting their shit together, we were like, we don't need to be here.
Yeah.
So we started walking back to the train station. And here's another bizarre thing. Some guy in an Army deuce and a half with an American flag flying off the back said, you guys need a ride?
Wow.
And we said, sure. So as the sun is coming up across Manhattan, we're in the back of an open Army deuce and a half, driving up Park Avenue, heading up towards Grand Central. Still with people cheering and waving, and it felt really strange.
Yeah.
And we came back. And yeah, it was, I don't regret going. I'm glad I went.
Yeah.
I still, I was always in the construction business. I still, every time I mix concrete and smell like, powdered concrete, before you start mixing it.
Of course.
It brings me right there. But like I said, there was an overwhelming draw that we had to go there. And then once we were there and kind of, for lack of a better term, did our shift.
Yeah. We
were like, not like, okay, we did it, let's get out of here. It was like we all had the feeling we have to go. Like, we're not.
It makes sense.
I don't say we're not welcome, but it certainly wasn't. We weren't welcome. We're like, this is their gig, not ours.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, there was a lot of their own buried within. And speaking of their own, I know Dana Hannon, who was a Bridgeport firefighter before transferring to the FDNY, who was a friend of mine. He was, obviously
He was
a brother
Jersey,
of yours.
Jersey guy.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and
you guys have that picture he took, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was on it. He was going through. He was a rookie. I think he was either on 21 engine or 22. I can't remember. Probably 21. And he leaned out the window going down the West Side Drive with like a disposable camera and took a picture out the window of them responding to the towers.
He was on 26 engine that day.
26. That was it,
26 engine. And he was with Paul Tegmeyer, who is another guy that I have a connection with from when I was a fireman in Poughkeepsie. He was from the fire district over. And so just kind of a strange turn of events, but Dana was local to us. He was a friend. I know he was, he was a cited firefighter in Bridgeport. I mean, I think he had the heroism award for a grab in Bridgeport, but he always wanted to be a New York City fireman. And
he did. And sometime on a more appropriate show, I'll tell you the story of the grab.
Sure.
I was there.
I'd love to hear that. But yes, thank you. And please keep that in mind.
And then Chris Blackwell on Rescue 3. Chris is a local up here.
Okay.
Chris was a volley he lived over in Putnam Lake, and he was a volley in New Fairfield, and he was a medic in Danbury and worked all over, a regional in a fly car and whatnot, and worked all over here. And when I was still in Ridgefield, he was a contract medic there. So we worked together there. Matter of fact, the one and only time I ever did like a real buff ride along in FDNY was when Chris was at 46 truck.
Is that right?
And rode a tour on 46.
Very cool. It's a good truck. Well, Chief, thank you. I'm just trying to capture some of these stories. Everybody was going about their normal, innocent life that day, and everything changed. A lot of the conversations I'm having with the guys that are helping me with this show are talking about how everything stopped. The world stopped, and this and that, and it's a powerful story because so many of the people that follow National Fire Radio are younger and did not really, they don't know it well. They were children when it happened, and so on. And so I think it's important that we preserve some of these stories. And it's just, for me too, it's just understanding where important people in my life were that day, because I know my own story, and I'm always interested in knowing everyone else's story. And so I appreciate that. I do want to ask you one other question, though, that I'm asking everybody when I'm done. Is there something you do each year, whether it's you just take a moment, say a quick prayer, you look up to the sky, you watch the programming? Is there something you do that you find every year, whether it's just a solemn minute that you take or whatever? Is there just something that stands out to you on the 11th every year that you do in remembrance or thinking about, our fallen?
I mean, obviously, being, especially now that I'm a chief, we're always doing events and whatnot. When I was in Bridgeport, I got very protective of the ceremony that we would do, because a lot of politicians would come, and I get it, but I almost kind of got in trouble a few times because I was really trying to protect the dignity of what we did.
Yeah.
And on a personal note, the guy I was with, Mike, we've grown apart. We're not really, we're not buddies. We don't see each other every day, but we call each other every year on that day, and just kind of, to be honest with you, I don't know that woman's name.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think I know where the house is, and sometimes I think, geez, I should drive over there, but I can't bring myself to do it. I have not been to the museum. I can't bring myself to do it.
Right.
I went once to the pit, to the fountains, maybe 3-4 years ago. I could not bring myself to do it before then, and have not since.
Yeah. I get it. I get it.
So yeah, like I said, Mike and I text or call every year, but that's the extent of my. You
shared a moment in time that will forever change time. So that makes sense for sure. Chief Thode, thank you, Rich. I appreciate you, brother. I always do. It's always nice to, just to chat with you and catch up. But thanks for doing this. I appreciate you very much.
No, thank you, Jeremy, and keep up the good work. It's important work. It's important to remember. It's important to, I don't want to say celebrate, but not only the guys that we lost, but the job and
Mhm.
and this country.
For sure. Hey, man, God bless America. Thank you, Chief. I appreciate you, brother. Take care. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
So my next guest, he's already on. I'm not having to call him. I don't have to dial the phone. I'm already talking with him, and I said, Rob, I really want to know where you were that day. Rob Ridley, my partner in crime. He's had a lot going on, new training, new probies. So you've been kind of MIA a little bit. A lot of people have been asking about you, but you got some things that you're going to be coming back with on NFR as your training slows down in the new position as a Cal Capitan slows down for you. But man, it's good to get you on a recorded call and not just me and you talking on the back end of things.
Right. 100%, man.
So listen, this project I'm doing for the September 11th podcast is just capturing some stories of people that I love and trust and believe in. And you're a very important person to me. And I'm curious what your story is. And all these years of doing these with you, I don't think I know your September 11th story. So please, would you mind sharing?
Yeah. So September 11th, 2001, I was a college student in the paramedic program at Dutchess Community College up in Poughkeepsie, New York. I had finished an English class, and the professor and I were actually walking out because he was an aviation geek, and I was like big into airplanes in high school. Like I just loved airplane history. And we saw a plane in the sky, and it was odd. And we were like, this is not normal air traffic for what we have in, the Poughkeepsie area with Newburgh, Stewart Airport and everything else. But we brushed it off, and it was such a fucking beautiful day. And I got a coffee from the cafeteria and went to my A&P class. And as we got up to the second floor, this EMT that I worked with, he had an alphanumeric pager.
Yeah. And
he got this buff page. It's like BNN or something like that. There's some kind of subscription service you could belong to back then. And he said, wow, it's an airplane hit the World Trade Center. And we're like, what? And he's like, yeah. And so we're all like, single engine plane or like maybe,
right.
Kind of thing. And he's like, oh, they just went to 3 alarms. And I was like, well, that makes sense. It's up there probably, like it's FDNY. And we went to A&P class, and everybody's pagers started to go off. And I was the only not cool kid who didn't have one of these pagers yet. But somebody said, they were going, like, kind of just whispering off the alarm assignments, like, oh, it's, 5th alarm or whatever. And I was like, oh, that's pretty big. Like, they must have a fire. And then I think it was the second plane.
So you hadn't seen anything yet. You were just hearing secondhand through pages and so on, but you're not watching the TV. You're not watching this live many. Okay.
I'm struggling to learn anatomy and physiology, and I'm extremely distracted by all this information because I was like, sounds like a pretty big fire. And then when they said something about a second plane, our professor, Dr. Fowler, she stopped. And she tilted her head to the side, and she was a smart woman. And she said, I'm sorry, did you guys say a second plane hit? And the guy said, yeah, like it just said a like full commercial airliner or whatever. He read the page off to us. And she said, we need more information. Let's go upstairs. And we went and left our class and went up to one of the labs that had a television. And you could see the look in everybody's face that something was really wrong.
Yeah.
And we saw the Twin Towers just burning, and it was like I don't remember ever being so speechless before. And looking around to the other paramedic students who all were volunteer firefighters and EMTs, and we were working commercial EMS, and like every one of us was kind of running through the scenario in our head of like what this really meant, like how, like just trying to make sense of it all. And one of the guys is like, jet fuel burns at this temperature, and that's a steel building. That's not going to go well. And we were just kind of like, it I don't want to say hit us, but like this time froze still with this information, and it was like the fastest time went, but it was the slowest. And then when the Pentagon got hit, we all immediately left. And like, it was like just like Dr. Fowler said, like we were dismissed, and we tried to walk calmly to our cars. And there was another student that was in class with me, Janine. She had kids, and she pulled out her cell phone, and like she'd been she's just like a strong woman. Like she was somebody who didn't take shit from anybody. She was from the city, and she called her husband to get her kids out of school. And like that tremble in her voice irked me. Like it sent a shiver down my spine that something was really wrong.
Yeah.
And like watching everybody try to walk to their cars, but like kind of pick up the pace. And just like, it was quiet. Nobody was talking except for people who had cell phones that were calling about wherever their family members were. And I think it was John Radigan was the kid's name. And he's a volunteer in Fairview and EMT with me at Sloper Willen. And I said, "Are you going to the station?" He's like, "Yeah." And I was like, "All right, I'm going to go home." And I got in my car, and my cousin Jimmy, I don't know why he did this, but I had this fear was coming over me, but and I was scared. I remember just being like looking to the sky and being like, "What's next?" But I also wanted to go. I wanted to go see my cousin because I didn't know what was going to be next. So I drove down to Home Depot where he worked, and walked in, and he's like, "Did you hear about this? This is crazy." And I was like, "Yeah." And this. Like I just said, "Jimmy, I don't know what's going on, but like, I love you, and I just wanted to come see you quick before I left." And he said, "Are you going down there?" It's like, "I don't know where I'm going, but like, and I don't know what's next, but like, I feel like I got to go to work." And I hugged him, and went home to my grandmother's house because I was staying with my grandmother at the time. And it was just like, the TV was on, and saw the bad news. And I think at this point that, the one tower had collapsed, and I got dressed, and my grandmother was like, she was a very religious woman. She had a mouth like a trucker, but like believed in God.
Yeah.
And I've never seen her pray like that before. And she had a Bible in one hand and a rosary in the other. And like, she grabbed me, like hugged me, and like prayed for me quick. And it was just a very powerful moment. And then my uncle Jimmy, who was this guy was a nut. Like, he's just he's a Marine. He drank a lot. He was a millwright, and he set houses. Like, so he was like a rough and tough, like contractor,
Sure.
like builder guy, and like Uncle Jimmy didn't take shit from anybody, and he didn't let me get away with anything. And I remember the bear hug he gave, and like, he looked afraid.
Yeah.
And I just said, like, what is going on?
How old were you?
I'm 19.
Yeah.
So I put my uniform on, and I called the station, and they're like, "Don't come here." And I was like, "What?" And they're like, "Do not come in. Like, we are swimming. We don't have ambulances for people. We're sending units to Westchester. At least that's the plan. But like, don't come in because there's literally like, we can't put you on a truck because there's no trucks because everybody, had kind of come in." And I was in between volunteering at the time. So like, my volunteer fire department was still in Sullivan County. I was applying to be a part of Croft Corners Fire Company. And my girlfriend at the time had called me, and she was like, she just in tears. And I went over to see her, and I was still going to just go to the station anyway. And I, at this point, I think, the other tower had collapsed, and we're looking at this on the television, and like the pass alarms. I remember hearing pass alarms in the news and thinking about like how you get in trouble in Fire One if your pass alarm went off. So you had to do the OSHA shuffle, and like that, I just kind of like started to key in on what that really meant, because there was just, it seemed like there were so many of them. And anybody who was down there that was doing live coverage, and like, it was just a kind of a surreal moment.
Yeah.
And then to find out about the plane in Pennsylvania, and that's that's when, like when it all, like, you know, at some point putting all the pieces together and realizing on the larger scale what was going on. And then, you know, and then they also, like, the phones didn't go down, but it was one of the few times in my life that I went to dial a number.
Yes.
To Sloper, like, you know, the local number to Sloper, and it said all circuits are busy. And I was like, what the?
Yeah, it was a really interesting time with, I remember we had Nextels, and, you know, it was that push to talk, bleep, bleep, you know, push to talk. And it's like a walkie talkie. A lot of people probably don't even know what they were, but, yeah, and that's how I got the first heads up. When a guy put an alert out to, like, our group on the Nextel, and it went like beep beep, and then like playing at the, you know, trade center, and that's how I found out about it. And I was like, oh my god! And then my story goes from there. But you know, communications that day was nothing what it is today. I mean, we had cell phones, we still had pagers. And people were having a hard time communicating with one another because the systems went down. The systems failed. I think the World Trade Center was one of the largest broadcasting towers at the time for communication networks on the, you know, in our area. And when that fell, communications was destroyed in a way. It was very hard to communicate with people. And I think that's why when you look at what was transpiring that day, the days after, people looking for their loved ones, obviously they're looking for, but the communications were so bad at the time. It was one thing that they couldn't get in touch, you know, maybe because they had perished, but the other one too was there was a lot of walking wounded, a lot of people that, you know, were stranded. A lot of people had to find creative ways to find refuge and help. And, you know, and when your cell phone's not working, and I think cell phones were not new, but newer, I would say, in 2001. So it wasn't what it is today. I mean, you know.
I know, like, and jokingly, we, you know, I think people my age and I'm say like, hey, we're the generation that had to figure out technology as it came out, because I didn't have a cell phone in high school, and that was a rarity. But upon when I graduated, like Cell One was the company back then. And like I got this small like Nokia cell phone that you could play Snake on. Yeah. And like you had to make, like, I always checked with my parents because I would tell them, I was like, I'm going to call you after 9 o'clock because that's when the calling's free.
Yep. Yeah. I remember. Yeah. I mean, I get that. I know too, like if you think about it, you know, cell phones weren't what they were because we don't have, I mean, how many people today would have been standing there just taking videos with their phones? I mean, you know, the coverage would have been overwhelming if people had, you know, what we have today, iPhones and you know, Androids that take incredible video, and everybody's taking a video. You know, I mean, there's a fire, you got 37 people across the street taking pictures. You got Citizen app that people use all the time. New York City firemen use Citizen app on the way to calls so they can get a good size up because it's real-time reporting. You know, so like it was a different time, and it was only 22 years ago, but such a different time. And so on. Yeah.
I think the other thing too, there was all my life, you know, that there was that much of it at that point, but like as a kid remembering, you know, learning about JFK and the assassination, and my mom and my grandmother and all these adults around me being like, I remember this day, and my grandmother telling me about Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
And like there was an awareness, because I remember at one point getting into the car and saying, like, I wonder if this is going to be like a Pearl Harbor moment, because I don't think I'm ever going to forget this day.
Yep.
And at the same time, like, you know, Molly and I, my wife, were talking about this the other day, and I said, oh, I'm going to do 15 minutes with Jeremy on the phone. And it was a very, I'm not trying to describe it, but like so September 11th is a tragedy, and every year around this time, I get, you know, just sad about thinking about, you know, the day and the loss and everything that changed and how it affected our lives in the tri-state area. But it a couple of years after September 11th, I ended up losing my cousin Jimmy, who I went down to see at Home Depot.
Yeah.
He had a heart attack. He had a seizure history. When he was a kid, he had a stroke. So one side of his body was paralyzed, but he made it work, and he was just such a good guy. He was a brother to me. And I have all these memories of Jimmy, and I'm not like, I don't know how to say this the right way, so I'll probably say it wrong, but in some ways I was thankful for September 11th because this person who I cared about and loved so much, that was family. Like, it is my clearest recollection of him. And if I close my eyes on the days where I miss him or anniversaries, I can picture him that day, and I can see his face. And when I told him that I was going to be going somewhere, I just didn't know where. Like, he smiled because he was a big supporter of me in the fire department. And like, I don't want to, like I said, I don't know if it's a positive, but like, I'm at least thankful that out of that whole tragic day that I have this memory of my one family member, because sometimes I think that stuff kind of, it fades away. Like,
of course,
that particular day, I can instantly recall. I close my eyes, I feel like I can recall these flashes of those scenes, and I can see them in such vivid detail.
Yeah.
So
I think things like this provide clarity on a lot of things. You think about as horrible as the day as it was, and there's no getting away from that. There's always some type of upside for someone somewhere, and I mean that with the most respect, and I mean that by saying, like, it might have brought loved ones back together. It could have repaired a marriage. It could have created a bond between parents and children that had separated over years for something that created fallout within a family. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of love and compassion and a sense of clarity that comes over people when tragedy strikes like this. And you wonder, I mean, Rob, it makes perfect sense that you shared a moment with somebody that was very special to you, and it was on a day that you can remember every step of your day, and that just makes sense. I mean, so cherish that memory for sure. Absolutely.
And I think, like you said, in some ways, I feel like it repaired a nation, because that's the one other thing that I really hold on to is I remember our patriotism came back. And I shouldn't even say that. I think our patriotism is always there. I think it's under the surface, in this country. And like, we see it with the flags and people who are obviously like America, and we're proud of being Americans. But like, on that day, like, it got awakened, and there was great leadership. And, that on its own was something that I'll always remember.
It felt, it's funny that one of the common themes throughout doing this project, I think you're like the 9th or 10th person I've now talked to about this for this episode. And a lot of us talked about how everything stopped and it seemed like everything shut down and people came together and so on. And I talked about, I forget with who, but I talked about how we turned a blind eye to everything else. Nothing else mattered. I think crime stopped. I think pettiness stopped. I think that people didn't see color, didn't see religion, didn't see faith. They didn't see any of it. They just saw people in a society that was under attack, and we bonded together to get through this. And the days, weeks, and months that followed, the unbelievable sense of pride about being an American and how proud we are. We've polarized ourselves over the years, and we've gotten back to a place, and probably even worse than we were prior to September 11th. And we have to get back. We have to recenter and bring back some of that, American pride and patriotism that is required. And and however that looks, I don't know, but that was a time that everyone put their own problems and issues aside, because there was something greater and bigger that needed our attention. And I feel that we need to kind of refocus on the whole and not on the individual that we've become.
Right. Because that's really where, like I said, the positive for me, or the I don't want to say the bright side, but like, people helping people because it was the right thing to do. I don't think there was like you said, a sense of self. It was like, we're going to get through this. Like, so many stories of somebody grabbing somebody by the arm and saying, come on, let's go. Or people picking, citizens in the towers picking somebody up who was disabled that couldn't make the stairs and carrying them down.
Countless stories. Countless.
So.
Countless stories of your everyday civilians stepping up and doing what's needed for the sense of humanity. I mean, and firefighters included, and police, Port Authority, the NYPD, New York City EMS, the New York City Fire Department, the Fire Patrol. Like there's so much there, and it's all done in the name of humanity. I mean, we all came together that day in tragedy, and there's just something about that when that happens. Man, it's powerful, and it's a moment that none of us will ever forget, and that's why telling our stories 22 years later, for me, this has not been easy. It's kind of ripped the wound open for me several times, and my story's not half as what many had, and I don't know. I just appreciate you taking a few minutes and sharing the story with me. I didn't know that, and I also really appreciate it because you shared something that was important to you with your cousin Jimmy, and that I know how important he was, and when he passed, I know how devastated you were with that, and so on. But yeah, man, thank you for sharing your story today. I appreciate you.
No, thank you for having me on as always, brother. So.
Oh, please, this is your platform. You can be on whenever you want. You just have to dial in and hit go, and you're in. So, well, listen, go enjoy your day. I know you got a lot planned today, and we squeezed this in, but looking forward to hearing what you got coming out for National Fire Radio too, pal. I'm excited for you.
Me too, man. It's going to be awesome stuff. So we'll talk to you soon, all right?
Later. Thanks for being a part of this. Bye.
No problem. Bye.
You.
I'm recording, just so you know. It's already live.
Well, hello.
My man, I'm doing this podcast on September 11th. I'm trying to get some stories out of people that I love and trust and admire. I don't know your September 11th story. You, like me, are a New Jersey guy. You were a front row seat and witness to it all. Just curious where you were that day and a little bit about your backstory on September 11th of 2001.
Yeah, man. Well, I appreciate you including me in this because, it's definitely a day none of us will ever forget, and especially us folks that are from this area and that participated in the response or just anything in this area just always kind of sets it apart from anywhere else because of what happened. So thank you for including me.
Of course, man. Absolutely.
So that day, I was at the time working career EMS. I worked night shift in our dispatch center, but I was also cross-trained to work on the road because that's where I started. So I had worked the night before, so the shift of the 10th into the 11th. So I worked 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Probably no surprise to you, but at that time, I would leave my shift at 7 a.m. and go right to the gym and work out for a morning workout. And so I did that. I was at the gym for about like an hour or so, a little over an hour, whatever my time was. I went home. I was living in an apartment with a couple guys, one of whom was a volunteer firefighter with me. And I went to bed, and I don't think, I just passed out, from working out and working all night. And he came like running into my room and was like, dude, a plane just crashed into one of the World Trade Center buildings. And I'm like, in the sleep days, and I get up and I go watch it on TV, and I'm immediately like, holy cow.
Yeah.
What's going on? That like, hey, I just woke up type thing, but just that shock. And I'm like, shit, I got to call work. So I called into work because I was only, I was like a quarter mile from our station. And they were like, come right in now. They already called for us. And I'm like, okay. So I'm like running around my little room in our apartment, getting like any spare anything that I had. Like if I had a length of rope, if I had carabiners, I had my own helmet at the time, like throwing it in a bag with my roommate chasing me around, going like, you're actually going in and you're going? And I'm like, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm going. So I went in. By the time I got there, our first wave of folks that were on duty had already left. So I was helping out on the dispatch desk. I was running around fueling some more rigs up for us because, by that point, the towers had collapsed.
Yeah.
And we watched that one happen, and our folks that went in that first wave were calling in and saying like, look, we're on a ferry. They put our ambulance on a ferry and we're going to Manhattan, type things. And it was just crazy. And then at about, I guess maybe like 11 a.m. You know, the time framing it's like anything else, you know, and especially over time. But somewhere around then, one of our main coordinator, you know, like big bosses came into dispatch and was like, "Come on, you're coming with me and a nurse." So it was I was the EMT, he was a medic, and we had a nurse with us. And he's like, "We're going to New York." I'm like, "All right, here we go." So it was really crazy, you know, driving in the ambulance on the turnpike and just no cars.
Yeah.
You know, like, and like nobody, was just emergency vehicles. Some you were passing because fire apparatus was driving slower than the ambulance, and then police vehicles were just whizzing by us. And we started our journey kind of in Giant Stadium, was a huge staging area.
Yes.
Like, right? Like, I don't even know if that's where you ended up. But
no, we were in Fort Lee, which is, for people that don't know, Fort Lee is the Jersey side of the George Washington Bridge. And so when we got to the bridge with our rescue truck, the Port Authority police who patrol the crossings and so on between both states stopped everyone from crossing because of the bomb threats against all the bridges and tunnels. People don't understand, but there was a much more bigger, sinister thing at play here, probably by opportunists and not part of the actual plot of 9/11. But there were bomb threats, a tremendous amount of, overall threat of terrorism across the board. And so they actually shut down the bridge and would not allow traffic across. And we literally just missed getting across in that initial phase. So.
Yeah, and that's like emergency vehicle traffic. Like
they shut it down.
You had someone with you who was an actor ready to do something, because we got searched. So, you know, and just when you said that about stopping the traffic on the bridge, and it totally, like, whenever I talk about this, like, it just brings you back to that day. And like, do you remember the jets?
Yes.
Like the military.
Terry was bawling her eyes out, and the little kids, Michael and Kendra, now are my big kids. They were huddled under the table, like in fear. It was
shaking you when they were so low. Like it was like being on an air show. They were so low, except it was effing for real that day. Or who knows what it was going to be.
Something else you said too, Pip. You said when you were going down the turnpike, and there were no vehicles. It's literally like time stood still when that happened, right? I mean, people, you have to put it in perspective. Like where we are. You're south of me, so you can't see New York City. You're an hour south or 45 minutes, 50 minutes south of New York City where you live. But where you were coming north and so on, you have a real good view of the New York City skyline as you come up the New Jersey Turnpike. And then where I live, I can see the skyline every single day of my life. So that smoke column on that blue, against that blue sky, was just it just stood out. And it was windy, so not windy, but there was a steady breeze, and it was like the smoke tapered off. Yeah.
Like and it was the buildings that were standing that you could normally see were covered in it. As we were driving north, you know, so it was real by that point. And you know, and before I left, I called my sister and my parents, and I was like, "Hey, I'm on my way to New York. I'll get in touch with you. Don't worry about me." Like,
no cell phone. Cell phone service was basically nil.
Yeah, for the most part.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah,
and even landlines were down for a while too. If you remember that end of it, like we lost some land. It was just so surreal. So we get to Giant Stadium, which is now MetLife Stadium for anyone keeping score, but it was Giant Stadium, I think, then at the time still. And the parking lot was just mobbed with emergency responders. Like, you know, there was like, you know, in Q5 was all the cops, and in P9 was all rescue trucks. And the bigger supervisor that I was with, you know, went to the command post, and he knew whoever was doing whatever there. And he was like, you know, "What do you got?" And he's like, "I got an EMT and a nurse with me." And he's like, "All right, you guys are going to be the command staff, being you have one of each for," it was like, I don't know, 40 ambulances, 3 rescue trucks, that are going to go stage over in like Liberty State Park type area, Hoboken, right. You know, right across. And you guys, the plan is to get you on ferries with your vehicles to go over to Manhattan. Because like you said, they stopped everybody. So there were initial searches done there at Giant Stadium. And then they rallied up everybody that they had ready to go in this task force with us. And legit, it was like, I don't know, 3 trooper cars, and we were the lead ambulance. And so we drove over to the park, and we got searched. Everybody got searched on their way in. So while all the other rigs were coming in behind us, we were kind of setting up with the command staff that was there. And there were helicopters on the ground. There was ferries lining up. There was just all kinds of things happening. And
unprecedented things.
Yeah, unbelievable. Like,
yeah.
It's just, there's scenes in, like, you know, and I kind of said this, but like, I can't remember it all, but I remember flashes. I remember seeing people I knew at Giant Stadium, and they were staying, but I was leaving, and them like hugging us when we were leaving, and then like flashes of being at the park, but we were right across the river, just watching and smelling. And like, I'm not going to say I was feeling the heat from the flames over there, but like, you could taste it, you know,
yeah.
like when you taste that fire type smell, and you're just standing there, and now it's like, hurry up and wait. And that's kind of the mode we stayed in that whole time. And then orders started coming down to like, everyone had to lock all their vehicles, and you had to leave a driver in your vehicle. Then we went around, we had runners, and I was one of the runners for the command staff of like collecting everyone's IDs before we could go across. And then, like I said about lock your vehicles, and then it was getting into like dinner time. And then it was like people, somehow this truck got in with people giving out sandwiches. And that turned into like a fiasco of like, don't eat the sandwiches, they may be poisoned. And like, just, again, unprecedented, right? Like, when are you ever going to think that's going to happen?
A heightened alert that we never had before, a vigilance that didn't exist prior to that day, right? I mean, if you think about it, you know, I mean, you and I, we've been doing this for quite a long time now. Nothing has prepared us for anything like September 11th did, you know, leading up to that.
Different thought process.
Yeah. And it became a different world that day in response to domestic terrorism as well as foreign terrorism. And, you know, the World Trade Center had been attacked before. We've had terrorism before in the country, but nothing on a scale like this, and nothing with a foreign threat where it was such devastation and destruction. Now, obviously, the 93 bombing of the World Trade Center could have been a lot worse if things
for sure
went in that direction, but they didn't, and so on. But I mean, that was still a tragic day. And you have Oklahoma City, that was a domestic terrorism bombing, right? We've had incidents like this, but nothing on such a grand scale, and nothing on the symbolism of capitalism and the United States and the freedom that we all have and on our soil. And I'll tell you, man, it rocked us, and it created a new nation that day that we've become. And being a firefighter and so on, I mean, we have certainly been directly in line to feel the change since then, right? I mean, you think about the type of training we go through today, the equipment that's available to us, the mobilization that never had been mobilized like that before. I mean, that day was such a cluster, not to anyone's fault. It's just nothing's ever been done on that scale before, right?
We sent people home with like the orders that were kind of and who knows where these orders were even coming from, right? It was one of those things.
Yeah.
But like, if you didn't have your EMT card and your license, we sent you home. And, you know, New Jersey with different rules, volleys don't have to have their EMT cards in their pocket. Again, people were running out of whatever, you know, but no, you had to go home. Like, okay, your ambulance is out of play. Bring us another one, because we're not going to let you go across for security concerns.
Yeah.
And it was just those things. And I think about it now where I'm like, even today, and I know what happened. I never thought a high rise would fall like that.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
Ever. And I watched it. Not only did it happen, I didn't watch it with my eyes. I watched it on TV like most of us did, but like, we watched it, you know, when that happened, and you just thought like, holy shit, this is real. Like, and that was it. And being right there, it was so real, Jeremy, like being across from there and seeing it. And again, this like, hurry up and wait. And then, I don't know, I guess it was like 10 o'clock or so, you know, the order came down that we're not going, you know, demobilize.
That's what it was. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We're not going? Like, there's people over there that need our help. But then it also kind of hit us all in the wave that there was nobody left to help.
Yeah.
You know, like there was, don't get me wrong, they were getting people out, but there was no need for 50 ambulances and 3 more rescue trucks because there weren't, you know, hundreds of people in need of care at that moment. And the ride home was actually worse than the ride there.
I know that. We
Right?
drove, yeah, I mean, looking out the back door of our rear walk-in rescue truck heading back home, not being able to get to the city on that first initial response. And as we're climbing the hill of the highway going back towards our municipality with the skyline, we're all looking out the back bifold door on the back of the rescue in absolute defeat that we weren't able to get there. We weren't able to do anything. And man, I'll tell you, that was hard. That was hard to be able to turn our back and to have to walk away. And a lot of that had to do with too, Pip, the fact that as the clock ticked on that day, mobilization became much more organized. And, you know, it really was in the beginning, it was throwing every single resource you could find at it. And then whatever stuck, and whatever didn't, we'll then mitigate that and do it correctly. And that's by the time the clock ticked on that night, the night of September 11th, you know, that's when they really got a lot of the mobilization together, putting together task forces and everything else. But just an incredible day that sticks with me. And I don't like, do you watch the 9/11 programs that are on like this week? They'll be on like all weekend. They'll be on. Do you watch them?
Nope. I'm not going to say that I haven't watched them.
Yeah.
I definitely don't watch them around now. I only went, so I still haven't been to the museum.
Yeah, I haven't either.
I only went to the reflecting pools so I only went back to the site. Here, I can go a little further. And I want to go back to my demobilization from that night, but I went back to the site because I ran tunnel to the towers, but there was really nothing down there. I went to the site again when I did a Go Ruck with some 555 folks, but did not go to the reflecting pools that day. I only went to the reflecting pools to do a 555 check presentation. Was the first time I was there. And Tracy and I brought the boys maybe 2 summers ago. We went there with them.
Yeah.
But I still haven't done the museum. Okay. And I want to bring the boys, but we're all ready for it. We just haven't done it yet.
I get it.
Is that an easy way to put it? Like,
I get it, man. I have such mixed emotions over it. And I'm gonna when I start this podcast right now, I'm in full disclosure. I'm not interviewing, but just having conversations with the people that I wanted to hear their stories from. And after I do all these recordings, we're gonna put them together for one episode. But I'm gonna start off with my story and my feelings about the day and the days after, and even 22 years later, how important this day is to me and what I think we should be doing about it and so on. But thank you. Thanks for sharing your story with me. I know you.
Go ahead. Credit real quick, though,
I want to wrap it though, because go ahead.
Yeah, I know, but the story goes on a little bit too, where like, you know, when we came back that night, you know, to the credit of my hospital-based EMS organization, any one of our employees that went over, like that was operating at the site, they all had to go to the ER that night for evaluation. Which I thought was really forward thinking on someone's part in the management scheme, to look out for those folks.
Yeah.
And we've been fortunate to this point that none of those folks have developed any type of the multiple diseases that occurred from folks that were there. But, you know, I thought that was really forward thinking. They actually got decon in the decon room, which again, forward thinking on their part.
Yeah.
You know, that night I lived in a college apartment building. You know, I finally came home and like, it was like all my neighbors were outside because they knew that I was gone, you know, the folks that I was friendly with. And there was lots of hugs, lots of tears. Obviously I'd already spoke to my family and things. And then it was like, we had a little local pub and I don't know, it was like 12:30 or so, 12, whatever time it was, who knows. But we walked over there, and I knew the owner, and it was really quiet in there. And this place only had one TV, and obviously that was the only thing on TV.
Yeah.
And I had, I don't know, however many cocktails I did rapidly there, but even the owner was like, guys, I know why you're here, but he's like, I got to go home. Like, I can't be here anymore. As much as I want to be here for you guys, I personally need to go home. Which was probably the right call then for everyone. But then those days after, dude, we sent ambulances all the way up to December into the city.
Yes.
You know, which are things I don't think people understand either.
Yes.
And I had so many opportunities, Jeremy, to go because of my seniority at the time and things, and I never went back. I couldn't bring myself, because at that time, what I didn't really understand was I was still feeling like a failure for not helping anybody that day, for like almost like imposter syndrome, right? Because think of all the guys that lost their lives that day, and you know, knowing a few of the folks that lost their lives, like I just never went back, and it was a hard time, like, and just the time here, and I know you want to wrap it, but one last thing too, if you want to hear an amazing song about the recovery from 9/11. Shillelagh Law, Christmas in New York. It's on Spotify. It's on YouTube. The YouTube videos are really powerful, but great local band that really summed up, you know, that getting over and moving forward that we all needed to do. So from in this area. So check that one out. Shillelagh Law, little shameless plug.
Cool. Thank you, brother. I appreciate
No
you.
worries, man.
All right, good. Thank you. Like I've been saying to everybody, it's just I just wanted to familiarize myself with your story because my story matters to me, and your story matters to me. So thanks for sharing, man. I appreciate you.
Appreciate you, dude.
All right,
Talk to you
Pip.
later, man.
Yep.
Be safe.
Yep. So my next guest on the September 11th special episode is retired Chief Aaron Heller. Aaron's been a friend of mine. He's another New Jersey guy. I know he was involved in September 11th in many different ways. He's going to come on and share his story, and I'm excited to hear it as well, and so on. So a friend of mine, Aaron Heller from On Scene Training and retired chief out of Hamilton Township, New Jersey. Let's give him a call.
Hello.
Chief.
Hey, man. How are you?
It's been way too long.
Yeah, it has. Yeah, it has.
That is, that's the problem these days. I'm finding I'm saying that a lot to people, you know. It's just been way too long. It always happens. But I know you're also one of those souls that when I do talk, it's like we catch right up and move forward. So how are you?
I'm doing well, man. I'm doing really well. No complaints at all.
Enjoying the beach life, huh?
Yeah. I definitely enjoyed the summer. Took a few weeks and just kind of hung out.
That's what retirement is, man. That's what you're supposed to be doing, no?
That's what they tell me. But I can tell you, man, I've scheduled this fall so tightly that it's going to be grinding hard. We got a lot of work ahead of us. So I'm stoked. But I needed that little mental break. And
we all do. I get it. So listen.
The best part.
Yeah, go ahead.
The best part about retirement, Jeremy, is you can still work your ass off, but you decide when you want to work your ass off.
I like that. I like that a lot. I'm looking forward to that day. I feel like that's not in sight anytime soon, though.
You'll get there.
Yeah, I hope so. I truly do, because I enjoy the relaxation in life, but I do love the grind too. But anyway, hey, thank you for joining me real quick. What I'm trying to do is document stories of people that I respect and trust and have gotten to know through the National Fire Radio platform. And, you and I we actually have kind of a long history together, now more so than it ever was, but we share some commonality. And one of them is a connection that we both have to September 11th, which was a dear, dear friend of yours and a friend of mine, Dana Hannon. And, his name came up before in another segment I did with Rich Thode, who was the chief of Bridgeport, Connecticut, then now he's the chief in Danbury. But what I'm trying to do is for a nice 10, 15-minute conversation. I'm just trying to capture where people that I respect and that I'm interested in to learn your story about where you were that day, and then what transpired from there. So, I mean, I appreciate you taking a few minutes with me. Would you mind sharing your story?
No, not at all.
Please.
Not at all. So, like you said, Dana was a dear friend, and his picture still hangs on the wall in my office. I'm actually looking at it now.
Perfect.
His memorial wristband that we all wore for years, mine was worn out so bad that I was afraid I'd break it. So I took it off and put it on my shelf with a lot of other really cool keepsakes, you know. So it's there with a bunch of my tins and a bunch of other stuff.
I get it.
Yeah. But so my 9/11 story is far less dramatic than some people's. But I was on the job. At that point I had about 11 years on the job. And I was in between my night tours. Back then we did 2 10-hour days, 2 14-hour night tours.
Right.
And then we were off for 4 days. So we worked the old Philly tour there. And I was in between my night tours that morning, got home from work, had run some runs the night before, the night of the 10th. Came home and literally was sitting on my couch watching the news, and I think we were watching the Today Show or something, you know, and saw everything start to happen and went, holy crap, man, this is for real. This wasn't an accident.
Yeah.
And you know, like everybody else, stunned when we saw the towers come down. I remember being in some groups, you know, back then you didn't have social media.
Right.
So it was, honestly, we communicated a lot on the Fools International's guest book.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That was how a ton of us from all over the country communicated with one another all the time. So you'd put a note on the guest book, somebody'd reply, and the thread would go on. And I know that actually Mike Gilbert from Fools International, one of the founders, still has all those threads.
Is that right? Wow.
He did. So, I mean, talk about history, holy cow. And I mean, you know, and then that's when it starts coming, you know, it's like all our friends that are FDNY guys, holy crap, is Champ okay? Is Ray okay? Is Timmy Klett okay? You know, where's Dana? Where's, you know, all these guys that we were friends with, and we were all young men at the time. You know, some of us weren't even officers yet. We were firemen, maybe a couple guys were lieutenants that we were tight with, but we were all young firemen. And so that was how we were communicating at the time. I had to go into work that night for the night tour, and it was really rough. You know, everybody's huddled around the TVs waiting to see who's going where. A lot of companies were self-dispatching.
Yeah.
We had a couple from Mercer County that I think that happened. We also had one from Hamilton Township, DQ Hose Company. They sent their special service unit up there. They were actually requested. And that special service unit to this day is the backup truck right now in Hamilton.
Wow.
So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But,
yeah,
they got a little decal on it that it was there. But anyway, so that being said, we worked our tour. I know that night we were out on a gasoline tanker that overturned out on Interstate 295, you know, major hazmat incident. And, you know, same thing. You're going to this and it's a hazmat overturn and it's this and it's that. You can think about is this another terrorist incident? You know, 7,500 gallon gasoline tanker flipped over in the middle of the highway in the dead center of the state, near the state capitol. You know, it was like, oh shit, what's next?
Well, and that was it. What I thought was really interesting though about that time was like it went from sheer innocence to everything was suspicious for a very long time afterwards.
Absolutely, for months afterwards.
Yeah,
and I'll try to be quick and tell you a couple
go ahead.
things. But so yeah, that was a big deal. And I at the time I was doing research and development and consulting work for Champion Rescue Tools. They were based out of California. And we had been working with FDNY and with Con Ed Gas on some different equipment that they were testing. So I was really kind of familiar with the guys at R&D.
Yeah.
They were down in Brooklyn. They were at 59 Page Avenue, big old warehouse right down there in Brooklyn. And Lieutenant Stein was the guy running it, Mike Stein. And he knew I had a lot of rescue tools and a lot of specialized equipment, specialized cutting equipment, and things like that I had basically in my garage. And he called me out of the blue. I get a phone call. Aaron, can you get here with your equipment?
Wow.
And I was at the firehouse at work. I said, yeah, I'll get out of work and come. He goes, no, don't come tonight. it's too ridiculous. We're not going to get anything accomplished tonight. And he says, first thing in the morning, we need you here. I'll fax you. Of course, this is back then, we were faxing. Yeah. I will fax you basically papers of transit that will get you through the checkpoints, get you through the tunnel, go into Holland Tunnel and the whole 9 yards. And that's what we did. I was really tight friends with Billy Hobson from Ocean County Fire Marshals at the time. I called Billy. I said, hey, I need help moving all these tools. And he met me that morning at my house. We picked up everything, and me, him, and another guy who was an Ocean County fireman and police officer, we loaded my truck and we went. And that was it. That was, we got up there. And
I have to think, Aaron, I just want to ask, I mean, to just paint a picture, right? Because a lot of people that listen to this don't really know the infrastructure between New York, New Jersey, and how that works. But the Holland Tunnel comes out of Jersey City, New Jersey, and that's across from basically Lower Manhattan. It's a two-tube tunnel that goes underneath the Hudson River, and you go from the New Jersey side, you go under, and all of a sudden you pop out, and you are literally like in downtown Manhattan.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What was that like? Because that had to be from I was just talking to Rich Thode, and he talked about how they walked through basically like the ferry terminal, and it went from like normalcy to chaos within 100 feet.
Yep. It was insane because, and I'll never forget, as we're cresting the hill, getting ready to go down into the tunnel.
Yeah.
And you see the city very clearly there, right? And it was the weirdest thing in the world to not see the towers. I mean, we grew up with them. Those were the Twin Towers. When we were little kids, my dad owned property in the city and on East 4th Street, Lower East Side. So we were in that area a lot. And it was just this stalwart thing always in your life. And it's so weird, I'm sure it's like people who live in Paris and see the Eiffel Tower every day, to go by there and not see that, and to just see the smoke still coming up and the dust and everything. It was completely surreal. And I'll never forget, Hobson said to me, once we go through this tunnel, our lives are never going to be the same. And I said to him, Billy, our lives are never going to be the same anyway.
Yeah.
It already happened. Now we just got to go with it. And we did. We got down there. We went, going down the West Side Highway and getting into the area where they wanted us was crazy. Mike told me where he wanted me. We went to the command post, and they said, bring your truck all the way through. They've basically cleared a path that you can get to the, basically there's the World Financial Center there.
Yes.
And that's where they wanted me to take all those tools, bring them into, basically it was like a USAR tool cache that they were creating in the World Financial Center down there.
Yeah.
So like American Express building or whatever it was at the time. And that's what we did. We found some hand trucks from some guys. I had brought a couple hand trucks, and we just loaded all these tools up and took them in. And Stein introduced me to the guys there, and that was it. That's where I met Nicky Giordano. Nicky's a legend out of Rescue 3.
Sure.
And he was our boss. And Nick said, listen, if you can stay here with me and help me do all this, get tools out. We're going to get tools to the pile. And back at that point, we were still thinking there were survivors,
Yes.
Yeah. And it was still rescue. It was rescue. And we worked with him. And there's some of the, we made friends with some people. I saw on the pile, you're devastated. Nobody mentally was there. I don't care what anybody says. We were all just doing what we were supposed to do, but mentally you're just in the weirdest position, I think. Look back at it. I saw Bobby Pressler down there and some of the other guys that I had known, and then started seeing some of our task force guys that I knew from Jersey and stuff like that. But it was surreal. It really was.
What do you go ahead?
Well, and to know that Dana was in that pile, because I'd heard roundabout that he was at that time with 26 engine.
Yes.
When he had originally been with 34 truck, but he was doing his high rise rotation with 26 engine. So
so much there. Today, when you think back 22 years later, I mean, you were a totally different person then than you are today, obviously, as we mature and grow old. And not that you're old, but older. I mean, well, think about it. I mean, you were a 10, 11-year man, and now you're retired, right? So, your outlook, your points of view, I mean, just all of it changes a little bit. I'm curious, though, how much that impacted you just as a firefighter. Did it make you think about, just a little bit more putting this job in perspective, that because, we went from 0 to 1,000 that day in miles per hour, meaning that everything was normal up until it wasn't anymore. And we lost so many that day. Did that put some things in perspective for you?
It did. I mean, I remember my son was September. He would have been about 2.5.
Yeah.
At that point, he was born in 9. So he was 2.5. And I'll never forget kneeling down and hugging him before I got in the truck to leave.
Yes.
We didn't know what we were going to.
Yeah.
We knew, but we didn't know. And, and it was tough. It was tough. And then coming home and then living, going to all the funerals and all the memorials. I'll never forget one of the things that we did. We were at Andy Frederick's memorial up in Suffern. And, they had the regular collation, and then they had kind of an invite collation,
right,
at the American Legion Hall or something like that. It was, and here I am out there throwing a football with Andy's kids and Mike Stallings from Orlando. Mike's a battalion chief in Orlando now, but Mike was one of the founding fools, and all those guys had come up for this, all the services, and it affected us. It definitely did. And I didn't realize it at the time, man. I really didn't. And honestly, I went through a lot of crap as I ended up going through a divorce and all that. And one of the things that my ex-wife said to me was, you didn't care as much after 9/11. You were changed. You were not the same. And I didn't want to hear it. Of course you don't want to hear these things. It's bullshit, whatever. But there was a point where you start saying, well, I could be dead tomorrow, so it changed a lot of guys. It screwed a lot of people up. I'm very fortunate. Thank God right now. I still have all my health is good. No lung problems, because they were driving around in these trucks. I remember the union, the iron workers or somebody, they were handing out masks and they were throwing us dry socks and stuff while we were there. Right. And you couldn't breathe in those masks because they kept clogging up because of all the concrete dust.
Right.
So what'd you do?
Took it off.
You took it off. And they were N95s or whatever they were back then. Yeah, dumbass us, right? Now you're breathing that shit, and now all these guys are dying of cancer, So
it's scary. I mean, you look at the horrific tragedy of that day 22 years ago, and then you look at what's happening today. It's now 22 years later, and the amount of people that have been consumed by cancer and other ailments due to September 11th, 22 years ago, the number exceeds those that were lost that day. And and the tragedy continues day in and day out. New funerals, new wakes, new ceremonies for people. And it's reliving it over and over. It has certainly plagued us here in the Northeast, especially New York and New Jersey area for sure. And so on. I really appreciate you sharing some of your story today, Aaron. I want to ask you one last question. When September 11th comes around every year, this year, it's going to be a Monday. Something you do, just a moment of remembrance, or do you go to a ceremony every year, or do you just hug your kids a little bit tighter? Something you do on the 11th every year?
Yeah, I probably get grouchier.
Makes sense.
I hate the week. I just do.
Yeah.
I get a little grouchier. I know that. I pull back a little bit. I know that. I will put my uniform on for sure, and I'll go to the Hamilton Memorial. They've got a really very, very, very nice 9/11 garden memorial with a big chunk of steel. I try to go to that every year, so I will be there for that. And honestly, probably tomorrow looks like the day that I can get away. I'm going to try to drive up and sit on a bench in Wyckoff at Dana's memorial.
Well, if you want to share a cup of coffee or something, you call me, because
I will.
Yeah, I'll be there. I'll be there Monday night. I go there every year on Monday. They do a potluck dinner because they did that on September 11th of 01 when they knew Dana was missing. And they brought all their members together. And ever since that day, they do that. And it's just something that it's important to me. It's important to my family, my children. And I make a point of that every year. But if you're coming up this way, don't hesitate to give me a call, please.
I'll let you know. Yeah.
Good, Chief.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what I'm thinking about right now. But other than that, it's a day of reflection. I've got a pile of printed pictures, because back then we didn't have digital photos.
That's right.
In the top drawer of my desk.
Yeah.
And we look at them once a year.
Yeah.
And, I cleaned out that drawer actually yesterday, and there they all were. And I didn't look through them yesterday. I said, that'll wait till Monday.
Gotcha.
And I'll look through them, and that's, you pray. You were gonna pray, and then just be thankful for what we have, and pray that it doesn't happen again.
That's it, brother. Chief, thank you very much for joining me today. I appreciate you, and I appreciate our friendship.
Same, brother. Same.
Thanks, Aaron. Take care, pal. See ya. Bye-bye. Yeah. Hey, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in for this episode on the National Fire Radio podcast platform. September 11th, 2001 was not an easy day for anyone. And this episode is just a small tribute to those that had fallen and those that deal with the tragedies that occurred that day and are still dealing with. For my friends to share some of their stories, I'm sure it wasn't easy for them to do. I put them on the spot and asked them if they would, and I didn't have anyone say no. But I'm sure it's not easy, and I know it was emotional for some of them, and I've gotten messages since we've recorded them, and a lot of people said that it made them really refocus on that day and never really put much thought to how they felt or where they were until now. And so for that, I apologize to them for putting them on the spot, but I believe that each story told today on this podcast is important in so many different ways. And if you stayed on and listened through, thank you. It was a memorable day that all of us can remember that time and place that we were at, where we were, how we felt, and certainly the time after September 11th of how we bonded together, get through this together. I will say this. There's a couple things that stood out to me throughout these segments with the different guests, a couple things that came together for me that I didn't really think about until after talking with, a lot of my friends here. A few of the things that I just wanted to point out is the common theme for many was that when they got the news, regardless of if they saw it on a pager, a phone, a text message, the TV, right, and so on, they felt that they needed to be in a place where they were comfortable, and they needed to be at the firehouse or in the presence of those that we work or volunteer with every single day. And I think that that's really important. It speaks volumes to how important the firehouse is to us, how important the people are in that firehouse to us. I think we take for granted sometimes the relationships that we have. When tragedy strikes like this and your first connotation is to maybe check on your family and make sure your family's okay, but then the very next thought that you have is, I need to get to the firehouse. And I know for me on September 11th, that was my thought. I watched the second plane hit the tower live. I was standing on a hill in Patterson, New Jersey, on the border of Clifton, New Jersey, with the skyline in plain view, smoke billowing off of the first tower, and I watched the second plane hit live in front of my eyes, not on television, but in front of my eyes from a distance of just maybe 10 miles, not even 5 miles, straight across. And I remember I was in a schoolyard, and traffic stopped, and I had gotten out of my car, and I was watching it unfold. I remember there was a city bus that stopped right in the middle of the street, and everybody got off the city bus. And I remember there were other cars that just stopped. Traffic stopped on a very busy road, and we all stood there in a asphalt schoolyard, basketball court, chain link fence. I remember it. And we were watching this happen. And the humanity that day of all of us looking at each other as human beings and as Americans, and nothing more than that, was powerful. And as I think about this and I peel back the layers on all of this, even 22 years later, From there, I know that the only thought I had was I called my girlfriend at the time, and we had just started dating, who's now my wife, Terry. We had just started dating, and remember calling her, and I said, hey, I'm going to the firehouse. And that was my immediate thought was I'm headed back to the firehouse. There was nothing more on my mind. It was, that's where I needed to be. And I remember getting to the firehouse about 20 minutes later from where I was. I remember pulling in. There were already, all the doors were up. There were already guys there. They were watching it. The interesting thing about my municipality where I volunteer as a firefighter is that our frequency is the same as a FDNY frequency, but we have a PL on a private line. We have a PL code on that frequency. And I had a mobile radio in my car at the time, and I took the PL off, and I could listen to all the radio transmissions. And I remember just hearing just god-awful commands and things going on that just you've never heard before. But the one thing that stood out to me most about that day on the radio transmissions was the tone and the voice of each person that was keying up that mic. The sense of urgency, the sense of doom, I don't know, but there was this different sound to the way the radio transmissions were broadcasted that day from each and every person. It was just chilling. And I remember getting to the firehouse, and we had the FDNY frequencies on, and we're listening to the mobilization of resources, the alarms getting banged up, just getting rung up, and then and we had the TVs on, and then the collapses. The collapse, another collapse. So when we're watching this all in real time and listening to the FDNY channels, it's chilling. It's still chilling to this day. I'll never forget it. I remember hearing a firefighter transmit on his radio that he was underneath an engine and he wasn't sure where he was. I think he said West Street. I don't know what rig it was. He said his name over the radio. That was powerful. And I'm 10, 15 miles away. And that just chilled all of us. The brevity of this, the size and scope, it's so hard to understand when you're not there in the first person. It just, you're removed by one step, and it makes some of it not real unless you were standing there. We eventually got called. To respond with our rescue truck. At the time, our rescue truck had a Cascade system on it for breathing air, and they thought they were going to need air trucks in the city. So we got bumped up the line to respond rather quickly in the pecking order of equipment being mobilized. And we went. And I remember on the way down, as like I said, we could see the skyline, and I remember watching that column of smoke in the blue sky. And we're watching it out the side windows. We had a rear walk-in rescue truck, and I remember myself and a bunch of guys in the back, and we're watching out the side slide windows, just that column as we go. Responding, getting stopped, not being able to get across the George Washington Bridge because the Port Authority police had shut down all the crossings due to threats and all sorts of other issues. We staged for a while, feeling helpless, watching the fighter jets circle New York City. Incredible. Just incredible. And again, I was removed from it. I wasn't there. I wasn't across that river. I was not at ground zero at the time. And it's still an overwhelming feeling. The worst part for me was as time ticked on, New Jersey started putting together their task force and response groups, and they did a better job at staging equipment. Very early on, it was literally, if you wanted to go, people just went, and departments were sending equipment and people, and there was no official ask or need and all of that. And so New Jersey finally got it together, their mobilization together. And remember, I mean, other than maybe a couple of hurricanes or something, there's never been a mobilization, anything like this in our area. And so the coordination just wasn't where it is today if something were to happen on such a large scale. So understandably, but there was a lot of miscommunication, a lot of back and forth, and eventually we were sent home. And man, you want to talk about the feeling of defeat. We want to help. We want to go. We want to do. We want to make our impact. We want to be a part of it because we feel that we have something to add. That's who we are. That's who we are as people. We run towards it. Whether it's on the fire ground or in your personal life, tragedy strikes, firefighters are typically the first ones to step up and go. And it was hard because I felt very defeated that day that we didn't get there. And I didn't understand the whole, I don't know, the magnitude of that day. I didn't understand that I think I was 25, 26 years old. I was still a kid, and it's hard just to think back about it now and, who I am today and my understanding of life and so on. I have a much better idea today than I did back then. And, it just, it was a different time, but I remember that sense of feeling defeated. I remember driving back up the highway and we climb elevation as you come across, and outside of New York City, you come across the George Washington Bridge. You travel on Route 4 west to 208 north, and it brings you back to our municipality. And as you're on these highways, it climbs in elevation several times, and you go up these hills. And I remember riding the back step of the rescue truck, looking out the back door, and all you see is that smoke column and dust cloud now of the collapsed towers. And it is, it's just like a large fog had just settled across New York, New Jersey, the Hudson River. It was something that you just never thought you would ever see or even try to comprehend or understand. It was hard. But that sense of being defeated, not being there, not being able to help, being held back, and then traveling back home and watching it still unfold out the back doors of a rescue truck, out of a walk-in rescue truck, watching it unfold as we're being sent home because they started to organize better and they were going to call through official channels when we were to mobilize. We got back, and I'll be honest with you, from there, I don't remember the rest of that day for the most part. I remember coming back and seeing Terry, and my stepkids now. At the time, they were, they were my girlfriend's kids, and they were young. They were 5 and 6, somewhere around there, 6 and 7. And they were young, and they didn't understand it. Terry picked them up early from school. Terry was upset. I remember her telling me how the fighter jets in the sky were just terrifying, and that it was frightening to hear them circle above. And the days and weeks and months that followed, learning about our friend Dana Hannon, who was lost, and he was working that day. There were so many people that I know that are New York City firefighters. Where we are, we're so close that we have the our area is known for getting guys on the job there. A lot of guys want to be New York City firemen that grow up in New Jersey in the shadows of New York City. And so we knew a lot of people that work in the city, and there was a lot of uncertainty in those early hours and days leading up, afterwards, about who was working, who's accounted for, who's not. And we kept that line of communication open, and that was important. But we knew Dana was missing. We knew Dana was lost. Dana was a volunteer member of the Wyckoff, New Jersey Fire Department, a very proactive and good, aggressive volunteer fire company here in Bergen County, New Jersey. They've put out some incredible firefighters into the world out of that firehouse, and Dana was one of them. And Dana had gone to Bridgeport, Connecticut, where he was awarded medals for his valor, but he always wanted to be a New York City firefighter and followed his dream from Bridgeport back to the FDNY. And he was doing his probationary year rotation, assigned Engine 26 that day, the Batcave, and they responded down. And from there, that was his last day. And he's forever riding. He's still very much in all of our memories. He's missed every single day. I had a couple people on this episode that you heard that were friends with him, that were mentors of his, that were Dana was one of those guys that was just one of those up-and-coming, young, excitable, loved the job. And he's missed. He's missed every single day. He's missed in Wyckoff. He's missed in Bridgeport. And he's certainly missed in the FDNY and all of his friends that he taught with at FDIC and different conferences and so on. He's missed every single day. People were taken from us that day, and we all had to deal with that. And not everybody had somebody to bring home. And the funerals that were after the memorial services and funerals were plentiful. I mean, they were every day, trying to mobilize people to go to them, trying to get people to represent. The FDNY was spread so thin on so many funeral details. It was hard to get the masses to these ceremonies, to these funerals. And I remember that. And the call went out, we need people to be at these services. It was hard. It was a very, very hard time that took its toll on this area and on the firefighters that were there and the firefighters that are there today. I will say this, the FDNY does an unbelievable job in remembering their own. That is a prideful job. A fire department that typically sees the very worst in humanity and the very best in its people. Everything happens in New York City, and their fire department is aces, and their people never forget their people. Every firehouse has a memorial or shrine to those that have fallen, whether it was September 11th or the days prior or the days after. They remember their own as if they still ride with them every single day. I challenge all of you, when we lose people like that, we need to do the same. We need to remember who they are, remember what they stood for, and create a legacy for them so that their name lives on and we just don't forget them by putting a plaque on the wall and moving on. I talk about it throughout this episode about talking about the job and how important that is. And when we talk and have conversation, we're keeping it alive. And for younger guys and girls that are listening to this, if you don't have really a personal story, go learn somebody else's. Thank you for listening today to my friends' stories and a little bit of my story. It matters. It matters. And if you don't have your own story because you were too young to really have one or remember that day, then go learn somebody else's story. Just Google it. Get online. Go online and read about a few or all that fell that day. The contributions that so many made to the American Fire Service, the talent, the incredible people, the brothers and sisters lost that day. A massive void was created in the FDNY as well as the American Fire Service. We've probably taken a few steps back because of that day on the amount of growth and learning we could have learned from some of those incredible leaders that fell that day. So be like the FDNY. Memorialize your people and keep their stories alive. And go out and talk about it. Talk about the day. Talk about September 11th, 2001 like it was yesterday. And keep that conversation going so that we can keep people alert so that they understand. And they keep and continue to understand. It's important. A few things I want to mention. I mentioned about the importance of all of us coming together, finding commonality in the firehouse and within one another's company. That day, some other themes. Time stood still. It was a moment in time that none of us will ever forget. Time literally stood still that day. I mentioned parking in a school parking lot, asphalt, basketball court in an elementary school, I think it was. And everything stopped around me. City buses, other cars. People stopped what they needed to do to witness history. It's important. I think that message really resonates with me, that sometimes we need to stop and look around. Walk with your head up, not with your head down. Look around, look at the people around you, and lend a hand when a hand is needed. I think that's what resonates with me when I think about where I was that day when I saw that second plane hit. People stopped giving a shit about themselves, and they cared more about what was occurring. We need to do that. Put that phone lens down, keep your head up, and look around and become involved. I think that's important. Lastly, thank you. Thank you to all of you that spent some time listening to this episode. I know it ran longer than our typical episodes. The podcast is super important to me, finding a voice, finding a place where I can share my ideas, thoughts, and opinions, and then share with you people that I find tremendous value in, people that make me better. That's what this podcast is all about. Thank you for being a part of that. And I couldn't do it if you guys weren't here to listen. And so that means everything to me. I talk about that selfish endeavor, that I need to do this. I need to put my thoughts out there. And if it affects anyone in a good way or a bad way, well, you know, people are listening, and I thank you for that, because it means the world to me, because I feel that, like I've always said, let's just talk about this job. The good, the bad, the ugly, everything in between. It's reality. And when we talk in real time and we can have conversations, whether they hurt or whether they make you feel good, it's reality. And I think we need more of that. So thank you all for tuning in to this September 11th, 2001 episode with me and a bunch of my friends. I appreciate your time and care. And go out and talk about the job, because when we talk about the job, we make the job better. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you at the next one. Jeremy, National Fire Radio.